Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We have a budget meeting on today's agenda, and we'll get started with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll ask Councilman David Greenwell to lead us in the invocation and Councilwoman Sawyer to lead us in the pledge. If everyone would please stand.
Our Heavenly Father, we ask for guidance this morning as we conduct the city's business. We ask for wisdom, as King Solomon did, in making our decisions today. Be with us and all the citizens of Oklahoma City. We ask these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A lot of smiles on people's faces this morning after last night's game. Gary, way to bring home the victory last night for Oklahoma at the softball. I know Councilman Mars has been volunteering yeoman's hours out at the softball. It's been long days, but the crowds have been terrific out there. Well, we'll call the meeting to order and then recess the council meeting and convene as the Finance Committee.
And here we are at our third Finance Committee meeting as we are making preparations for the 12-13 budget, and we have three presentations this morning, and the first is from Development Services and Bob Tiener.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to present our budget today. Our budget starts on page 139 of the budget book. I'd like to introduce Rick Wickenkamp, my Assistant Director, J.J. Chambliss, Zoning and Subdivision, Charles Locke, you see him every week, Code Enforcement, David Adcock with Development Center. Catherine English wasn't able to come today, but I'm sure she's out there working hard right now. Our mission statement reflects the department's focus on public safety, customer service, and improving the overall quality of life in the city. We have 5 issues that I'll speak about briefly. As you're aware, code enforcement priorities are an important part, and we address that in the budget this year. Our live exit community at the shelter, we're striving to achieve the 75% live exit rate. Development review, this is our zoning subdivision section. Developments are becoming more and more complex, and we're using different techniques to try to solve those issues. Development process coordination, this is our development center that does the building permits licensing. And then public safety priorities, this is a new priority from council, and that's the focus of our field officers with animal welfare. Our first strategic result, our attempt here is to achieve 50% citizen satisfaction for code enforcement. I've said this before, typically you're either mad at us for going out to your property, or you're mad at us because we didn't get out to the property that you complained about quick enough. So it's kind of hard to get above 50%, but this year's budget we're proposing to add 5 new code enforcement officers and 1 customer service position, neighborhood support representative. This will allow us for the first time ever to have staff on the weekends to be able to do our yard parking and other weekend enforcements. So we feel pretty good about the opportunity here that we'll be able to improve on our numbers. The next result, this is the 75% live exit rate. I kind of like to talk about this a little bit. Our current estimate for the end of the year this year is 57%. That 75% is a high goal, but we continue to move in that direction. We partner with the Central Oklahoma Humane Society, with the National ASPCA, several rescue groups, and we're doing a lot to try to improve on that number. Here's a graph that kind of shows our trend there since 2007. It's been moving in a positive direction. You can note there, December of 11, we hit 71% in our live exit rate. So we think that that's an achievable goal. I would mention that just in May, we opened up the OK Humane quarantine facility that's on the shelter property. Basically what they do is they take at-risk dogs and then they They quarantine them for 2 weeks, and then if they meet all certain criteria, they'll transfer them to other locations that need adoptable animals. And when I say high risk, these are animals that are owner surrender. So if they went directly into our shelter, they would be at risk to be euthanized early if we were full. Their goal is they took 81 in May. They hope once they're fully running, they can do up to 1,800 a year, which will take those directly out of our shelter. The next result here is this is our subdivision and zoning. We have 2 criteria here. 80% of the applicants proposing new subdivisions within 60 days. Our current estimate is 56%. And there's a couple of things that are going on here. New developments. These are primarily new residential developments. I think that the citizens have become more aware of their involvement in these types of applications. We're looking at traffic issues, we're looking at drainage issues, and these types of developments have become more complex, and they take longer for the Planning Commission and our staff to get through. But we'll continue to work with Public Works and utilities, and we feel comfortable that we'll get that number back up to 80. The 80% for zoning applications, we're at 82%. We feel pretty comfortable that we can continue to achieve that. This next one is this is Development Center, and I'd like to talk about these 3. We've changed this first one: complete 100% of our initial reviews within 15 working days. We've changed this goal. We've changed that from 20 working days, and on the second one, we've gone from 15 to 10. So we feel real comfortable that we're moving to improve that number, and that's going to provide better service for our customers. Our current estimate's 98% for the new commercial and 93% for remodels, so we feel pretty good that we're going to be able to go to 15 in 10 days and still stay in that 90%, try to achieve 100%. The third one there is complete 70% of the construction inspections within 2 days. Right now, we're at 64%. Some of you may have received calls back in the fall of last year. We were struggling to get our inspections done, and we've worked really hard. Since December, we've achieved our 70%. We went December, January, December, January, February, we exceeded the 70%. And some of the things that we've done there to address that, we provided customer service to all our employees in the Development Center. And for the first time, we partnered with MetroTech, and we designed a training session for our field inspectors, where what we tried to do is help them understand that contractors, property owners are customers, and when they're on a job inspecting, that they needed to deal with them like they were customers. And so I think this is the first time ever that our field officers have had that kind of training. And I think that right now we're at 64%, but we're improving, and I think that's all going to be better. This next one, this is our field officers, our automated, our computer-aided dispatch system. We're trying to achieve 90% within 2 hours for priority 1 calls. Right now, we're working with IT to try to get better numbers to report. So what we found out after looking at our numbers a little bit, there's been some duplications. Sometimes our officers will go out there and they won't enter that they've actually been to the site, and so then that kind of messes with our numbers when we try to calculate how long it takes us to respond. But we're working with IT, and we're going to resolve all those issues, and we'll have better numbers to report. Our organization, these are the 5 divisions: the administration, animal welfare, code enforcement, development center, and subdivision zoning. Our administrative section, the budget's about $1.6 million. There are 5 employees in this division, so that hasn't changed in this budget. Okay, animal welfare, our 3 sections: animal control, animal shelter, and veterinary services. I just need to note there that that horse knew how to chew gum before it came to the shelter. We didn't teach it that, but so we have 50 full-time employees in this division. Just a few numbers there. We do over 24,000 service calls a year. We care for 28,000 live animals in our shelter. Our veterinary staff does about 7,000 spayed or neuters a year. Something that I want to note here is that last year's budget, you approved a community spayed and neuter program where we took half of our adoption fees and put them into an account where we use that to increase our spayed and neuters for privately owned pets. That program started in January. We've already exceeded 1,000, and we anticipate that we'll add another 4,000, or annually we'll be able to do up to 4,000. So that would be another 4,000 on top of that 7,000 that we do. And these are all things that will help us achieve that 75% goal. The next is code enforcement. It's divided in two sections, nuisance abatement and code inspections. We investigate about over 48,000 cases a year. We also have 28 proactive areas that we actually inspect 45,000 properties a year in those proactive areas. The budget for that is 3.38. I talked about it earlier. We're going to add 5 code inspectors with 1 neighborhood support representative. We feel that right now we have a measure that we try to complete 80% of the time. We want to complete an inspection within 4 days. We feel that with the addition of those 5 inspectors, we should get that number up to closer to 98%. So if we do that, then we feel that we'll have better customer satisfaction and service. The Development Center, it's broken down into 3 sections: construction inspections, plan review, permits, and licensing. This is our largest division, has 83 positions. Some of the statistics for that: we do over 100,000 inspections a year. You can see we have 900 commercial plan reviews and 2,700 single-family plan reviews. The budget for this is about $6.3 million. This proposed budget adds a quality control coordinator that we'll utilize in our permit section to track our finances and our data. Our permit section does over $11 million a year, and we felt that we needed someone there that had some financial expertise that could help us track that money. We're also adding a customer service rep, which will go right into our permit counter and help us answer calls, deal with building permits. A couple things I'd like to talk about here. In July of last year, we worked with IT, and they added online garage sale requests as well as online inspections. So from July to this year, to this date, we had over 4,000 garage sale permits sold online. That's about a third of what we get, but that's 4,000 calls or walk-ins that we didn't have to deal with on the permit counter. And then we have another 2,500 online inspection requests that came in. When they come in that way, we don't have to deal with them on the permit counter. So that frees up time to handle our other calls. So we appreciate the work that IT did to get us there. We have some other opportunities in that area to put some actually buy your permit online. Additionally, any contractor can go online and check the status of their inspections, the status of their permits. So there's no more of that calling in and saying, well, you didn't do our inspection. Well, we can go online and check when we did that inspection. So just a couple, excuse me, our inspections up to year to date are up 18%, excuse me, and our permits sold are up 11%, and the revenues corresponding to that. So activity is higher. Our next divisions, subdivision and zoning, it's about an $800,000. Still have 9 employees. There weren't any changes here. They do over 600 cases a year. And then to wrap it up, our major budget changes, the 5 code inspections, 1 neighborhood support rep, and then a quality control inspector and a senior customer service rep. We are adding a part-time custodian at the shelter. Shelter's open 7 days a week, and we felt we have over 300 people in the shelter a day. We felt that we needed some additional help to keep those public areas clean. Here's our budget summary. This is an increase over last year's budget of about $1.1 million. We've increased 8 full-time positions. So our total budget's just over $16 million with 190. And I'll entertain any questions.
Bob? Oh, Bob, you said you had 83 positions in your development group.
Center, yeah.
Are they all filled?
Now, there's about 40 that are field inspectors. The rest are in the
But
permanent.
are all the positions filled?
No, sir. And that's been a part of our problem with getting those inspections done is turnover. You know, when you lose an inspector, it's hard to cover for them because they're doing 14, 15 inspections a day. So if they're gone, that adds up pretty quickly. But we're working hard to get those filled, but we are short. I think right now we're about three inspectors out short.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Bob, just recently the legislature passed a bill that decreased the number of days in which notice was given as it relates to the dilapidated.
Yes.
Was that a compromise in reference to the number of days, or was that what you all had requested? And what effect do you think that will have in reference to some of the problems of some of these delays on some properties in some communities?
Well, we are already doing the 30-day notice,
Okay.
so that really won't impact our service.
Okay.
It's really hard to tell if there'll be a citywide impact at this point, but we already met that 30-day notice requirement before they changed it from 60 days.
Okay.
So,
And the neighborhood support representative, what does that individual do?
well, they process when an inspector does an inspection in the field, they bring the paperwork in, and then currently we have 4 reps that process that paperwork. So they'll take it in, put it in our system, so we can track it, get it to a contractor to do the cleanup. Now, something that I need to mention here is that we're transitioning in code enforcement from Hanson to Acela. We're hoping next year the Acela system will help us better track our inspectors in the field. It provides us some reporting systems that we don't have now with Hanson. So we're hoping that we'll be able to, improve our customer service through an improved computer system where we track all our activities. But that's not online yet. We'll also eventually have computers in the field for our inspectors like we do with the development center. So those are all good things. We're just kind of starting there. We're not there yet, but hopefully this time next year I'll be able to say that we've done that and it's helped improve our customer service.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Larry?
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned you're going to put in 5 additional inspectors, and one of their functions will be to provide weekend and after-hour inspection capabilities.
Well, Charles and I have been talking about exactly how we're going to do that. We're definitely going to have coverage on Saturdays and Sundays. The after-hour we haven't really talked about as much. We have to figure out the best way to, we could go to a four-day, 10-hour, which would give us some after-hour work, but we haven't made those decisions. But we're definitely going to do the weekend inspections on Saturday and Sunday, because that's when you catch a lot of your yard parking and you catch your vendors that are out on the street. So we're definitely covering that, and then we'll make a determination as we get into it if we need to go to an after or a later hour inspection or not.
Okay, then let me rephrase my question then. On the weekend inspections, it's going to take a while to get to that point, to be able to do that? In other words, should this budget be approved July 1, starting July 2, we're not going to be able to have weekend inspections necessarily. It's going to take a while to ramp up, will it not?
Right, we'll have to hire those inspectors. The 5 inspectors that we're hiring will be given the first opportunity to work that. I mean, they'll be the ones working the weekend shift. Now, if we have people that are currently on staff that want to do that, we can put them there. But, excuse me, it will take us to get those new inspectors in before we can really start the weekend.
So the neighbors that are out there, I have a number of neighbors that are really excited about that particular functionality. How long do you anticipate it'll be before that really kicks in? 2 months, 3 months?
Probably 2 months. Now, if we still, currently we'll work overtime on the weekend. So if you have specific locations or problems, let us know and we can schedule that. But it will take a couple of months to get it going.
Thank you, sir.
David?
Thank you, Your Honor. Bob, your department's one of my more favorite ones to look at. To follow up on Councilman Ryan's question about the certain positions as far as inspectors not being able to fill them currently, do you know, are the salaries that we're paying, are they competitive from a market standpoint? Is that an issue?
Well, our indication are that the starting salary may be low because what you do here is most of our inspectors are contractors that can make a little more money because they're not, they can work longer hours. But I think the initial numbers are a little low, but a lot of it is we have to get people that want to go from the private sector to the working for the city, and that's part of the issue.
Okay.
Personnel does a really good job of going out there and evaluating the jobs and what the market is and what we need to do. And I think Bob's right on that. Initially they're a little low, but overall, as time goes on, I think we can, if you want to make a career out of it, it's actually a pretty good place to be.
Right, and when you get into the benefits, it's really
Okay.
Some people, as they evaluate that, are a little short-sighted and are looking for immediate cash in hand, including overtime and such, and that's where I think Bob's talking about. Initially, we have some problems from time to time.
Okay. Bob, going back to the animal control area, realistic, when do you think we might achieve that 75% release rate? I know the statistics that you showed are very encouraging that on a month-to-month basis we're approaching the 70% at times.
We changed that measure to 2015. Originally it was 2012, and that was not realistic. So our goal for 2013 is 65%. So we may be able to make 2015 and everything goes perfectly. But, we have added some things that, the additional spade and neuters, that's not an immediate impact. That takes time to work through the process. And our community cats program, that's another group that eventually over time the numbers that we receive and the key is to limit the numbers we receive into the shelter to be able to control how many we have to euthanize. But 2015 might be a reasonable. Ask me next year and I'll tell you.
Okay, thank you. Well, my last question then, and this is in the development area. Any consideration to restructuring it to where it's almost, I'm going to use the term, a one-stop shop where somebody that may need several different licenses or permits could go to one window and begin the process, and that person who's assigned or who first meets with that individual stays with that request until it's completed in full?
We have talked about that, and there are things that we do there that are basically a one-stop. A residential permit is pretty much a one-stop. You can get it in a day. Some of the licensing you can get in a day. Part of the problem is you have to be able to cross-train your staff to be able to answer whatever question or whatever permit the person asks for when they walk up.
Right.
And due to the volume that we do, it's hard to have that time to train, to cross-train them where they can pick up. We have individuals on staff now that can do just about any piece of it.
Right.
But to get them all to do that, it will take considerably more training and time to train.
Right, I understand. My only suggestion or comment would be maybe that person who's dealing with the customer doesn't have to know all the various permits, but whenever they go to a particular person who may issue that permit, you know, it's one person working for the city going to the various areas that get a permit instead of that customer having to go, say, from one floor to the
More of a
next.
liaison role?
Yes. Just a thought.
We can look into that, see what we can do.
Thank you.
I guess just a quick comment, Bob. You talked a little bit about that trying to do 70% of inspections within
2 days.
2 days of being asked. So that leaves 30% out there. How far out does that horizon go? And
Well, it really depends on the type of inspection. The thing that delays it typically are rejections where they make a request and we go out there and the building's not open, or, you know, they've done something wrong and then we have to go back. So those are kind of extended. One thing that we have done just recently, I should have mentioned this, is we've given our inspectors cell phones. So now when they go out to a site, if the door's locked, they can contact the contractor or the homeowner and say, we need to get in here. Or they can schedule it and say, I'll be there in 30 minutes, can you open the building? And that should help us. To improve better than, to get it 2 days, 100% of the time, we probably don't have enough staff yet for that. But, I mean, there are management things that we can look at that make us better, but...
well, I think it's helpful to understand, though, that a lot of the time it's not our issue. It's a coordination issue with multiple parties. And so, you know, I know when we get calls, sometimes it makes it feel like it's, you know, we just don't have the staff or we don't have people there. But I think it's fair to say that many times it's a coordination effort between both parties.
And we do every day, our chiefs check the latest inspection out. So if you've got one that's 5 days out for some reason, those are assigned, like this morning, those would have been assigned, and you get those first. So, I mean, we hope to not have anybody out very far, but there are times, I mean, that 70% is an average. You know, there are some that take longer than others, and sometimes the council may hear from those people. But we try through our system with our chiefs to get the ones that have been on the books the longest, we try to get them first the next day.
Thank you very much.
Councilman Sawyer, that's the only data point I look at every week is the number of building, the length of time on building inspections. Bob sends me, Bob knows this, Bob knows it's very important to me. He sends me a report every Monday to Laura and I, and we look at it each week to see where we're at. And it's made a marked improvement since the first of the year. We've added some inspectors. We've gotten some other previously vacant positions filled. They're focused on it. They've done customer service training. Did you mention customer service training, Bob? The
Yes.
additional phones that they've added. We've had a lot of attention to this, and I really give Bob credit for taking the bull by the horns and really focusing on that. And I think we've really improved it over the last, I would say, 6 months or so. And I know, but based upon just looking at the data every Monday that he sends me, that and he knows I'm watching it, and he goes on down the line.
My phone hasn't rung as much. I probably shouldn't have said that.
Bob, going back to the time, the 30-day notice, are there any cities that you're aware of that have a shorter notice frame in reference to our issues with dilapidated structures?
I'm not aware of that, but
Have we always had 30 days?
Yes, it's always been 30. We can look into that to see if there are other communities that do it faster.
Okay, thank you.
This question, this relates to something the city manager said on customer service training. Have all your people gone through that yet, Bob, or is it in progress? Or
All the development center has gone through it, and the people that interact with the customer at animal welfare, at zoning and subdivision, and code enforcement, I think we put 6 new code enforcement officers through that. So the ones that have direct contact have been through that.
and it's a continuing program. As new people come on, you'll send them through this
Well,
customer service.
we don't have it set up as continuing program because we just completed it, but we are looking at doing that and making sure everybody, what our plan is to do a refresher every year and then any new employees to get them that kind of training.
Thank you.
Next up is IT. Chad Melvin's coming up. You know, IT is one that our customers are generally not calling us saying, no, you really need more IT personnel. That's not something, but listening to Bob's presentation couldn't have been a better prelude to Chad coming up here, because it talks about the things that we can do through technology that makes us more efficient through our line departments, as Bob pointed out. Chad's folks do just a great job with very little resources, but yet this year we were able to add some more resources to IT. And with that, Chad.
Good morning. My name is Shad Meldrum. I'm happy to present the IT budget to you. I want to start by recognizing our management staff that's here that does keep all this stuff running. I'm going to start with Stacy Bone. She's over the applications group, keeps that stuff going. Next is Ralph Gibson. He's over security and infrastructure. Third is Kerry Wagnon over our public safety systems. And not here this morning is David Grothy, and he's over enhancements and the server system. So they're really the ones that keep all this stuff running, and there's a tremendous amount of stuff that we have. I want to start, our budget starts on page 207 of the budget book. Next one, I want to start with our mission statement. The mission of the Information Technology Department is to provide business solutions and technology services to city departments so they can better serve the Oklahoma City community. As example, go back one slide. Up there is a upcoming application. We're working with personnel to get out there, and that's an online job application system. It's something that we purchased this last year and went through that process. This will enhance citizens' ability to apply for jobs in the city. They'll get announcements of jobs that are coming out. They'll be able to fill out an application, and it'll actually notify them if a job comes out that they're eligible for. It notifies them of where they are in the process. So this will be a great improvement for personnel. We're actually adding kiosks around the city so that employees that don't have or access to computers regularly can apply for jobs. Then also we're putting 4 out in the field so that either citizens can go to libraries or they can go to community centers to be able to apply for jobs in the city. So that's a significant thing that's coming out, and that should be available July 1st, so real soon. Next slide. Strategic issues. Through the LFR process, leading for results, we have 6 strategic issues that we list each year. First is system security and data integrity. Next is meeting growing demand. Third is realizing business process improvements. Fourth is future operational funding and resources. 5 is advanced skill sets of our staff to take care of everything. And 6 is functional utilization of technology. Updating a graph that we've had in our presentation for the last couple of years shows the growth in the IT budget over the last 11 years relative to staff. This year we are fortunate to propose to add 6 positions. That now would bring us to 98, which is actually still below where we were in 2002. So we are doing quite a bit with limited resources. I want to highlight, we're able to do this. Typically, we have one staff member that's an expert on a system. We don't have a whole lot of redundancy within the department. That's okay if we keep things running, but if we have somebody on vacation or sick, then that could be an issue, or if somebody leaves the city or gets promoted. It's not atypical for somebody to be called on vacation or where they're sick to be able to log in and help us with an issue that's come up. IT staff are willing to do a lot. They even upgrade systems on the weekends. I want to highlight just last Memorial weekend we did upgrade of the SAP system with utilities, so staff had to stay around to be able to do that. So significant commitment of IT staff. Next slide, strategic results. First one we wanted to highlight is issue number 1, system security and data integrity. That involves systems or security standards compliance for technology infrastructure to prevent loss of system integrity, loss of data confidentiality, decreased ability for the organization to provide services, financial instability, exposing employees and citizens to identity theft, and erosion of citizen confidence. Even with the cuts we had 2 years ago, we made a commitment within the department to focus on this area and bring our systems up to where we think they should be. Our target's always been 95%. You can see on the graph up there, 2 years ago we were just over 60%. We put in some systems like System Center Configuration Manager and System Center Operations Manager, which doesn't mean that much, but it helps us to manage these systems with fewer staff. The one side effect of this is it requires more of those staff to be able to manage those systems when I'm talking skills and what they have to do. So even though we're more efficient, we've met this target, those staff have much more responsibility and skills required to maintain this. Next slide, highlighting strategic result. This is related to issue number 3, and that's realizing business process improvements. Decreasing availability of IT resources to analyze business processes to realize service and efficiency improvements can impact quality of citizen services, cross-departmental efficiencies, service complexity, and missed improvement opportunities. Again, from our Leading for Results surveys, I wanted to highlight here, as far as technology implementation, when we implement new technology for departments, we're receiving 100% positive feedback when we're able to do that. The ongoing support, the surveys that go out to our customers, we're getting 92%. Our target's 95%, which is really high, but that's a really good positive response for customer feedback. The one there that's interesting is continuous business improvement. We have surveys that go out there on continuous use of the applications. We're only at 58%, which isn't so much a performance issue of the IT department, but kind of highlights this issue of not having people be able to go back and analyze what departments are doing with these systems, say 2 years after they've started using them, and help them to do better. So departments want somebody to come back in and do this business analysis for them and help them become even more efficient. That one in the bottom also, I wanted to highlight that when we did our cuts 2 years ago, that was an area where we said we were going to have less staff available to do strategic planning with departments and some of this business process improvements. Next slide, summary of our proposed budget. Our budget will be just over $20 million, and you can see that we will have 98 staff, which is an addition of 6 this budget year. Next slide. The breakdown of our department budget, which is interesting to show what departments get pieces of our budget in the end. Still, this year, the public safety area of operation is over half of our budget, so that's a significant area where we have responsibility and financial obligation. Next slide. Our department structure. Last year, we added a new public safety support line of business. This year, the only changes to our department structure are to add staff. You can see within the information technology infrastructure, line of business, and public safety support, we're adding staff. This goes back to where our risk is the highest on maintaining these systems. So we're adding 2 in security, 1 in server, 1 in public application support, and 1 in public safety communication center. Next slide. Major changes in our budget is a summary. We have a 4% increase in required technology maintenance dollars, so that's what it takes to maintain all these applications with the vendors. We're proposed to add 6 positions. First to be the program lead for security. We've always had a security program. We've never had a program lead for it. The responsibility obviously keeps growing, so that's an area we want to add a team lead. Next is CCTV infrastructure support. That's something that the IT department has taken on to centralize, manage the city's CCTV systems. 2 program analysts dedicated to public safety systems.
Go back to CCTV. Talk about that a little bit in more detail, if you would, Chad, exactly what that involves.
CCTV, the city has over 1,000 CCTV cameras out there. About 500 are airports, 500 are in various departments. They've been put in over the years. The city's done a good job of having it to where everybody is on one system, but there's been no central point of centralization for setting standards and maintaining this thing. So departments have had various ways of maintaining their pieces on their own, so this will bring it all in to where we can manage this. There are issues with certain cameras that will come up that without having this centralized, it may only become an issue once somebody needs to access the video and realize that there was a problem with that camera. So we propose to add 1 position, centralize the management for that, and that's something all the stakeholders and departments actually wanted. This person will make sure that the vendors that are hired to maintain these things do it, and that they cycle through all the cameras and make sure everything's working appropriately. Next one is on server support, adding position there, and then the last one is on-site application support for 911 CAD. We'd been doing that with a part-time position. This will be somebody on the floor at the 911 center able to answer those customer calls, which obviously they can't take the time to call into the service desk and then wait for somebody to get back to them. So that'll be a person on the floor to help with those users. Highlighting our different lines of business according to Leading for Results. The first is our customer support line of business. They provide service desk, on-site support, and technology training functions. They're the first point of contact for customers when they have issues with their technology. They also manage as a liaison what the customer needs and ensuring that IT is getting back to those customer issues and requests. I wanted to highlight this also because this was, when we went through cuts a couple of years ago, this is an area we cut and we've used part-time staff to basically answer the phone and record the calls. So that put more responsibility on our other teams to respond to those calls. The whole goal of the service desk is to be able to take the calls and to respond as quickly as possible. So this year we're actually going to project to exceed our target of being able to resolve 4,500 calls within that team, and that means that 41% of everything that comes in the service desk is being resolved by service desk, so that's significant. Next slide. Our application support line of business, they provide enterprise application support services. So just a quick list of some of the types of things they take care of, and all these systems are things that if they go down or they're not working, some city business will cease to operate for that period of time. So these are things that have to keep working. PeopleSoft, Kronos timekeeping, cashiering systems, SAP, services, call and work order systems, permits and licenses, code enforcement, our SIRE agenda management system, and our document management systems. As Bob was talking about, one thing we want to highlight there is in the upper right, that slide or that picture is a field user actually using an iPad to do an inspection. This is something that the Acela vendor, the software we use, just came out with in January. Interesting thing here is when they came out with it and they put it on the Apple Store, we downloaded it and immediately found some issues and sent it back to the vendor. And so in a roundabout way, we became kind of an exclusive, the city became an exclusive tester of their iPad app. So now they send new code to us to let us test before they put it out there. But this is something we were holding on because to equip those field users with ruggedized laptops, they're about $4,000 a piece. So we were waiting on an iPad app from the vendor to be able to do this, iPads being $700. We're moving now to be able to get 40 of them out there for those field users. They are connected back with commercial wireless, so they're doing updates directly out in the field, and this is something we see will be expanded even more over the next coming year. The lower right slide that's an iPad screen. That's what the iPad app looks like out there, so highly usable for those field users. Next line of business is technology enhancements. They provide new technology identification, business analysis, custom application development, project management, and implementation services to city departments. I want to highlight also this does include the ongoing Maps for Kids technology support is within this line of business. Two applications there talking about custom application development. The build versus buy is something we always evaluate. We worked with Public Works and various other departments. We decided to build a construction management and tracking application internally, so that's nearing the end of its development cycle right now. That's a picture on the left. So that'll be a custom application to do exactly what those departments want to do with their construction tracking. On the right is the Leading for Results management. We're working with budget to expand the Leading for Results application and enhance it to do what we want. This was something years ago we went through Leading for Results that the vendor came in and had a product that didn't do quite what we wanted, so we decided as a city to build that internally. In this last year, we were able to get results out so citizens can go and look and see how the departments perform on various measures, so significant deliverable there. Just to highlight, when we talk about enhancements, we only have 3 staff members actually build custom applications, and in fact, we're short one right now. We have a vacancy we're trying to hire. So they have 46 applications, interfaces that they're trying to maintain. So when we do build something, we don't just build it and leave it. We have to take care of it forever. So we're pretty much at capacity for what those people can do. I want to highlight also project management back on that. When a department has a proposal to do technology, they use our project managers to come in, and they don't just sit off the side and help them get the technology going. They actually take charge of the whole project. So they conduct a business analysis, gather all their requirements. They actually draft the RFP and get it out there. They actually conduct the vendor interviews, and as you know, there can be a big gap between what the sales guy for a piece of software will tell you and what actually can be implemented. So they help bridge that gap and ensure that departments get what they need. So they negotiate the contract, and at the end, get this stuff implemented the way it needs to be implemented. So we're pretty proud that everything we've done with departments has been successful once it's finally implemented, so we don't have any failed technology projects that end up wasting money. The next line of business to highlight is the technology infrastructure line of business. They provide security, network, unified communications, server, and client configuration services to city departments. When I say unified communications, that's email, voicemail, everything nowadays can come into one system, so the voice over IP system, so that's a very significant area that's managed in there. Within this is where we propose to add a security program lead. Security, as you can imagine, you're seeing in the news, is an ever-growing, ever-evolving threat that we have to take care of and manage. So we actually want to add a program lead position over that. We want to add one position for our server infrastructure. Currently, today, we have over 441 servers in production. This staff has been able to virtualize servers, so we're 60% virtualized. The reason that's significant is because that means that that's less physical servers we have to buy. So rather than spending $1 million a year to buy physical servers to keep these upgraded, we're spending about $200,000. So that's significant savings for the city. But to be able to manage those virtualized systems requires higher technical skills. So this is where we're wanting to add to that team to be able to manage all this. On top of that, there's about 40 terabytes of data in the city. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but the city's data, just the data we're keeping in the city, is growing by about 170% per year. So these systems, all the video, SAP systems, all these are growing almost twofold per year. So all this has to be backed up and managed, and this takes the load off of the departments and everybody to make sure when they go to get data, the data is actually there. Next slide. Public safety support. They provide public safety applications, systems, communications, and facility management for the city. Within this, the supporting public safety applications is obviously a high priority. Being able to respond to those, having the redundancy of staff, so we propose to add 2 public safety applications support staff. The other is the staff member to be on the floor at the 911 CAD center to be able to respond to user issues there. This is stuff that, again, we're not really expecting those users to have to call our service desk and wait for a response from IT staff. We need somebody on the floor there. We've been doing this with part-timer. It's very successful, so this adds a full-time position to be able to manage that. If you didn't know, the IT department actually manages the Public Safety Communication Center from the AC systems all the way through. I know General Services was able to add a position this year to be able to help us manage that facility, which will be significant for us. There have been issues even on Christmas Eve over there with AC systems going out that we're having to respond to. So huge area of responsibility there. On the public safety communications side, I wanted to highlight, because I think sometimes it gets forgotten, that when we talk about public safety communications, there's over 5,000 radios out there, and the whole radio system has to be managed. There's 890 mobile data computers in police and fire vehicles that they're managing. But they don't just manage all that stuff. They actually outfit the police cars. That's an operation we tried to have external that wasn't successful. The quality wasn't like we wanted. So we have staff in the city that's now assigned within the IT department to actually outfit the police cars. That's installing the cages, the push bumpers in the front, the light bars and everything. So that's done by the IT department. And the last slide is I wanted to highlight part of our mission is really a vision too, and we're committed to improving the lives of the citizens of Oklahoma City. We like to think that we're setting the benchmark for other organizations. Questions?
All right, questions for Chad? David?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Your Honor. Shad, first I want to compliment and commend you for your focus on system security and data integrity. You know, I was up in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago and visiting with the deputy directors of the Internal Revenue Service. Taxpayer fraud and security is their biggest concern in each division. I would just ask that we look, if we do have any Social Security numbers in a non-essential position, place, you know, I don't know if we previously required that for utilities or any kind of deposits, that we might consider purging that if it's no longer necessary and just keep Social Security numbers on employees and absolute critical type data, because that's the biggest goal of anybody trying to get data, is combining a person's name and Social Security number along with, you know, if they can, addresses and date of birth. Then they start filing false, fraudulent tax returns, and with the ability to file electronically now, that is the biggest concern with the Internal Revenue Service. So I'm just suggesting that we review our policy, and if we have any Social Security numbers that we really don't think we need, to consider purging those and continue to put as much focus, and I commend you on adding another person in your department focusing just on security. We cannot overstate the importance of security with all this information we have. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
Shad, one of the things that last year was a big concern of mine that I heard expressed again today was the lack of redundancy in some of the departments and having to, you know, call folks on vacation if the system goes down. Or I was delighted to see that we've been able to add 6 people to the department. Are there specific areas that you continue to be particularly concerned about that need additional attention? Or?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, there's areas we are concerned about. The redundancy is a hard issue, and even being able to hire people is some of our biggest problems, too, because we, like I said, some of our staff are highly skilled in some of the applications and systems they maintain, and, you know, adding a position to be able to go out and find somebody to be able to do that is a struggle sometimes, too, which we've seen recently. So we do have vendor support on the side if we do need some of that help. It is an area we're looking at constantly. We you know, ensure that those staff get the training year to year they need, and that we're not burning them out on those systems. Redundancy would be nice, and it's something we'll keep evaluating to look at the risk. I think we did address quite a bit of redundancy issues, but we still have some, obviously.
Well, the manager opened his comments by saying that IT is a department that we typically don't get calls about, but it certainly supports all of the other areas that we do get calls about. And so it's just critically important to be sure we have enough spots filled. Thank you I commend you for all the work you've done.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, Chad, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is the airport presentation with Mark Cranenberg.
Good morning, Mark Cranenberg, Airports Department, and I'm very pleased to present the Airports Department budget for fiscal year 2013. The Airports budget is on page 77 in your budget book. And what I'd like to do first is to just give you an overview of who we are and what we do, and a brief overview of the finances for the fiscal year 2013 Airport Trust budget, and then we'll get into the portion that involves our performance results with the city. Who we are, we're very fortunate in Oklahoma City to have all 3 classes of major airports designated by the Federal Aviation Administration. Of course, our commercial airport, Will Rogers World Airport, and Wiley Post Airport, our corporate reliever airport in northwest Oklahoma City, and Clarence E. Page Airport, a smaller general aviation airport in west Oklahoma City. We provide facilities and movement for over 3.5 million people through Will Rogers World Airport. And we also provide facilities for operations for our corporate and general aviation aircraft through our general aviation airports. We manage a budget of over $96 million. Our operating budget for next year is proposed to be $55,802,000, capital budget $40,403,000, and our major areas of concern are administering programs to comply with regulatory requirements. We have a significant capital improvement program each year over construction and maintenance of buildings and infrastructure, and we provide leasing opportunities for over 9,000 acres of land on all of our 3 airports and many facilities. We manage over 400 leases, tenants, permits, revocable permits at the airport in different contracts. Here you see 5 major commercial airlines. We have the Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center, which leases 1,000 acres on the west side of Will Rogers World Airport. We have leases with several government agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We have 2 fixed base operators, AAR and Atlantic. We have Val Air Aviation at Wiley Post, Air Inc., of course, on the east side of Will Rogers World Airport, Southwest Airlines Reservation Center on Will Rogers, and the Metrotech Aviation Career Campus. Our sources of funds, these are the charges for our tenants and users at the airport. The building rents are for lease payments for the terminal and cargo building, also other buildings and hangars, and also the Federal Transfer Center. Our landing fees are charged to passenger carriers and freight carriers. It's based on a landed weight per 1,000 pounds, $2.84. Our parking revenues are related to our public parking operation for all of our garages and our surface parking. And our concessions are related to our food and beverage and retail concessions in the terminal building, as well as all 8 of our rental car companies in the terminal. The fuel sales represents an 8 cents fuel flowage fee for all aviation fuel, which is either retailed or self-fueled by tenants that have those privileges, and airport charges consisting of maintenance reimbursements and other apron fees, and ground rentals, for a total airport charges to our tenants and users of $56,248,000. We have other revenue as well. Oil and gas revenue is still fairly significant at the airport. We use this revenue a lot for our matching grants for the FAA. We have some interest on our investments. Passenger facility charges is important to us because it supplements our capital program funding, and the customer facility charge we're anticipating next year based on the $4.50 customer facility charge recently approved. We always have considerable federal and state participation with grants and reimbursable agreements. This next year, the TSA with our checked baggage inspection system and also our CCTV system, and several grants for Will Rogers and Clarence E. Page Airport for airfield improvements. The carryover represents the Mike Monroney escrow account and prior year revenues to support our capital program. We have revenue bond proceeds resulting from our PFCs to date and future CFCs for a total budget of $96,205,000. Balancing the budget, we have services and fees, and this includes our major contracts at the airport, our public parking contract, $2 million, our aircraft rescue and firefighting contract, $2.1 million, janitorial for the terminal and other outlying buildings in Wiley Post, $916,000, and supplemental security of $578,000. Other commodities, various, $997,000, and you see our debt requirements for both senior lien and junior lien funding for the airports. We have the airport's transfer cash fund, which I'll get into a little bit later. So total operating expenses, $49,073,000. We have reserves, which are revenues in 2013, which will be used for prior capital improvements, and then our capital outlay, as I mentioned before, of $40,403,000 balances our trust budget next year of $96,205,000. The mission statement of the airports is to provide management and operation and development of the city's airports for our tenants, users, and the public so we can have a safe transportation system. We have 4 issues I want to discuss with you this morning. The first one is the unstable nature of our revenue, long-term property leases, lagging market rates, and some cost recovery policies outdated, and just the continued increases in providing services, if not addressed, can impact the quality of service, deferred maintenance, and lack of funding for capital projects. Results under this issue, by 2016, we want our new and renewed leases to be at market rate. We're currently doing that at 100%, and as well, we have cost recovery rates that we're including in leases as they come up for due. In 2015, we want food and beverage retail concession revenues to increase by 10%, and we're doing very well on that. In fiscal year 10, we were up 5%, fiscal year 11, 4%, and this fiscal year we're estimated to be at least 2%. Our issue number 2 is the changing number of takeoffs, landings, passenger boardings, aviation business activity, and always increasing safety, security, and environmental requirements, if not addressed, can impact staffing, workload and performance, funding requirements for future capital improvements, and long-term planning and customer satisfaction. By 2013, we want to have an implementation plan to address the recommendations that was done in the airport parking study in 2010. We're about 50% completed on that. The things we're doing to date, we're doing the parking rehabilitation for our 2 and original 5-story parking garage. We're moving the rental cars out to a consolidated rental car facility, and we did do a rate increase. Some things we have pending, signage, wayfinding, and some parking amenities once we get the rental cars relocated. As you're aware, we're under design with the facility to meet our rental car demand, and we want to start discussing improvements for either terminal expansion or improvements. We want to make sure that we're leaning forward to the future with regard to our facilities. The growth in Oklahoma City's population and activity has resulted in additional demand for air service that could, if not met, result in missed revenues, economic development opportunities, obviously tourism, convention business opportunities, and decreased customer satisfaction. By 2016, we measure the cost each year to the airlines per boarding passenger. We don't want to increase that more than 5%. We're doing very well on that. In fiscal year 11, we actually decreased our cost to the airlines by 1/5 of 1%. Staff will accomplish a minimum of 3 marketing presentations to airlines each year. We typically attend 2 air service conferences where we have miniature meetings, 20, 25-minute meetings with 7 or 8 airlines. Each year we also do targeted presentations to airlines. This past year we went to see United Airlines and Southwest Airlines. By 2015, boarding passengers will increase by 10% compared to fiscal year 10. That's a 2% per year obvious, but in fiscal year 11 we were up 3%, in fiscal year 12 4%, and in this fiscal year coming up we estimate at least 2%. Our last issue is the amount of land available for vacant facilities. If not utilized, will prevent the airport from generating sustainable revenue to fund operations and capital. It'll incur costs on existing facilities that are vacant and prevent the city from receiving the benefits of economic development opportunities. By 2015, Portland will be relocated. Portland is the boundary road on the east side of the airport, and that construction should start next summer. By 2015, we'll increase our parking spaces by 5%. Largely that will be accomplished by the vacancy of the rental cars in the terminal, and by 2013, 30% of developable acres that we have will be leased. Moving to our lines of business, our administrative line of business to provide leadership, support, and information to the department. Our programs major our business services, executive leadership, and public information and marketing. Of course, our air service, we spend a lot of time on air service. It's almost daily we deal with something with our airlines. Here are some of the achievements last year. American Airlines added 2 daily nonstops to Los Angeles in April of last year. Nonstop to San Francisco by United in August of 2011. Delta Airlines has increased capacity throughout the year with larger aircraft. That happens frequently throughout the year. All airlines either add or reduce based on seasonal volume of passengers. And of course, June 3rd, Southwest Airlines began nonstop service to Chicago Midway. This next graph just shows that we're continually increasing. We've had 12 straight months of increased boarding passengers at Will Rogers. Moving on to the commercial line of business, major programs are airfield ops, runway and taxiway, safety, security, and inspections. A couple of our key measures, we get inspected each year by the FAA. It's a Part 139 regulation inspection. We had 85%. This year, our target is always 100%. The discrepancies on this were a couple of minor recurring training and training documentation of our employees, and we had a fixed-base operator field truck that didn't have the appropriate fuel placard. The percentage of days with zero security incidents in the last few months, we've had some of our tenants and concession personnel have a few security breaches at the airport in the secure area. These are doors which are not secure, going from unsecure, secure, and back and forth. We've been addressing those in our monthly airline managers meetings, and when anybody does violate this policy, we revoke their badge, and basically they can't work again until they get retrained, and that usually sends a message. One of the projects I want to call out in this line of business is the checked baggage inspection system. We're proposing almost $1.6 million next year. This is a $25 million project to completely redo the baggage makeup system at Will Rogers. In the general aviation line of business, major programs are operations and grounds, and as you can see, the general aviation airports gets inspected as well. We're doing well on that, and we always track the number of days that the runway is closed, and they're doing a good job. We haven't had any construction. Usually airport construction on the airfield impacts this in a big way. One of the projects that Clarence E. Page Airport will have is a grant this year from the FAA for some various runway and lighting improvements at Page Airport. On the maintenance side of the house, you see our major programs there. The key measures are operating hours where our major mechanical systems are working. We're doing well in that area. This also includes our escalators and elevators and moving walkways, and also the percentage of critical work orders that are completed within 3 days. We always wanted 100%. This is at 90%. Lots of times weather impacts this particular measure. One of the items that we have going on now that's important for the public is the rehabilitation project, a $4 million project for our two-story, which includes the short-term parking that's been relocated to our first floor of the new garage, and our old 5-story parking garage. This next year we're budgeting $1.5 million for that. We also have a major multi-year project, for $8 million project for taxiway H realignment for the east side of the airport. You see Atlantic and Air Inc. in the background there. This is all in preparation of getting the east side developed to handle larger aircraft. We're realigning this taxiway, changing it from asphalt to concrete and making it more weight-bearing. On the property line of business, you see the major programs, a couple of the key measures. We had capital improvement projects completed within contract days. We're knocked down on this one. We've had 5 or 6 projects, a couple at Mike Monroney that were Mike Monroney-related delays. We had a couple of others that had material and contractor delays on supplies, and we had one airport project where we left the project open until we got a letter closeout from the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. One that we're proud of on the total project construction cost as a result of change orders and amendments, our target is 5%. We want to track where our money goes after we award the contracts, and this is actually at 1%, so we're doing a good job in managing our contracts. Of course, you're familiar with this, $3.3 million next year. We're budgeting for the design of the consolidated rental car facility. This will be an approximate $39 million facility. We also have the realignment of Portland Avenue. I mentioned that before. The $1.4 million is what's being budgeted for the engineering part of this project. And then finally, at Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center, it's a major line of business. We used to do $1 million, $2 million a year. Now we're doing $12, $13 million of work over at Mike Monroney, responsible for buildings and infrastructure. There you see almost $12 million for heating and air systems. The proposed cash fund, which is the transfer fund that comprises the portion of the airport budget that relates to the city's general fund, is $16,710,305. And our major changes this year, we are asking to add some positions. We haven't added a position at the airport per se since 2009. We've had a couple that have been added to Mike Monroney Aeronautical Center in the last couple of years, but those are dedicated to the Mike Monroney business that's been flourishing and thriving. So we have the airport emergency coordinator we're asking for. We've had demonstrated need for this position over the last couple of years with incidents at the airport. We need better planning, not just within our own department, but with our tenants and users as we deal with emergency. The airport is a multi-agency response environment. When something happens other than police and fire, normally that's associated with it, we have other agencies that respond as well. This will also act as our primary contact with risk management. Accounting manager, we're asking for this. It's critical to our financing. The The airport continues to grow. There's more and more responsibilities on the accounting and finance side with our major projects. The accounting manager will manage the daily activities of the municipal accountants, and then we currently only have 5 in our department and 2 part-time. We need the business manager, that's the division head, to be more focused on financial planning, forecasting, modeling for current projects and future projects, including the airline use agreement, which has several large initiatives to weigh in before negotiations. The airport is requesting a system support specialist too. We have 2 IT personnel at the airport dedicated to the airport. We have several proprietary IT systems at the airport. Those 2 people are on call 24/7, also deal with all of the city interface systems with the city's information technology department, have a great relationship with that department. And the amount of work that has just come on board with the airport the last few years, those 2 just can't do it all themselves anymore. The plumber is something we've outsourced for many years, and we really believe that we want to bring that in-house now. We spend about $200,000 on outsourcing plumber, and we can save $150,000 of that if we bring it in-house and have more timely service. The airport operations administrative coordinator, this is a change that came about at the last minute since the budget book. In your budget book, it talks about an admin coordinator for the public information program. We changed that to the operations division because of the amount of work that the Transportation Security Administration puts on our operations division to do criminal history record checks and security threat assessments, not just for airport department employees, but for everyone that does business at the airport or uses the airport as a tenant. Even our construction personnel all have to be badged. Right now I have an operations officer, which is augmenting that operation. The irrigation tech. We have 20 miles of irrigation pipe that's stretched from the terminal all the way to Airport Road. We've got a $350,000 capital project to enhance that system. It's got 4,000 sprinkler heads, 130 acres of turf beds and landscape, and it's all being run by the Horticulture 2 right now, which has its own crews, and so we need some help there. The Civil Engineer 3 and 4 to replace the airport facility planner. We had been in contact with personnel over the last few months to make a recommendation that was in the water study. We actually are in the process of hiring the engineer 4 at this time. It's on this slide because it technically is a new position for next year. And the airport facility planner actually will be replaced with a Civil Engineer 3, which will be hired subsequent to the 4. That is actually the same classification as the facility planner, so it's really a net zero on the budget. That completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions on the airport.
Any questions for Mark? David?
Your Honor. Mark, thank you for a great report. I'd like to say that the airport's as important to the continued growth and success of the city as the funder is, but I understand the controversy that statement would make, so I'll hold back. But I do think the council has to be aware and concerned about the continued growth of the airport and support whenever we can, especially the areas surrounding the airport, because the demands and the needs that the airport may have 20 years from now may be substantially different as the city continues to grow and larger aircraft has to use the airport, and the need for continued growth and improvement of all the facilities out there, I think, is just a given at this point, given the success and growth that the city's currently experiencing. I don't see any reason to think that it won't. So all I'm suggesting is that the council really tries to protect and enhance the airport whenever the opportunity presents itself. I think the development of the east side of the airport is a critical accomplishment because I know the FAA normally doesn't like to allow that kind of development. And the connection between the airport and Tinker Air Force Base from an economic development, aerospace, I think is going to be great. I think I-240 provides a perfect link between the 2 locations, and hopefully you'll want to participate in that focus group on the continued growth of I-240. But I just think it's a great report, and we really need to do all that we can to protect and enhance the airport because it's going to be critical, I think, to the continued success and growth of the city. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
Well, I guess Mark's heard a lot from me recently, but my 2 issues are the TSA relationship and the time it seems to be taking to get people moved through security. And are we addressing that even from a physical standpoint?
Yes, we are. I'd be happy to give an update on that. Since the install of the automated imaging machines, which are the whole body imagers that you've heard so much about, we have 2 on the east checkpoint and 1 on the west checkpoint. They were installed around spring break. The TSA has done a pretty good job getting up to speed. They did have a learning curve that they needed to go through as their people get used to that system. And for a while, they were not using, in conjunction with those machines, the walk-through metal detectors, and so we had an issue with that, and so they are using those. We also have the advantage of having the TSA bomb dogs at the airport, which gives the TSA extra comfort in that if you use just the metal detector, that you have the bomb dogs to supplement the threats that are out there that TSA has to deal with. As far as infrastructure, yes, we are looking at least some temporary ways initially so that we can possibly add a couple of more lanes. If you may remember the renovation of the airport a few years ago, might not want to remember that, but we did have an overflow area that was in the west side of the terminal, and that room is still available, and we're working with the TSA to get equipment, and that they will get equipment and also provide manning that we can open up that area for the portion of the summer, because we know that summer will be a push. Our employments continue to grow. I might also suggest that with MAPS 3 and the advent eventually of a convention center, a natural byproduct of a project like that is hopefully more nonstops and more people, more rental cars, and more people going through the airport. So again, we want to be leaning forward as we think about any facility enhancement for customer satisfaction and growth at the airport to handle what we know is coming.
And I certainly know that through your report, it's obvious that we're working very hard on the parking issues and expanding the number of spaces, and I think moving the rental car facility off location is an excellent idea. There's some significant short-term pain, and I might have your folks take a little harder look at some signage. It's very hard when you get out there to understand where the short-term, you can figure out where short-term is. It's hard to figure out where the medium-term parking is in that same parking garage, and lots of confusion, I think.
Our temporary location for parking of short-term actually is very well signed right now, going into the first floor of the new 5-story garage. But yes, we are actually tracking the number of parking spaces at the airport, and I might say there's over 7,200 of them when you combine the garage and surface lots. So we are tracking when those get to 85%. We are not far from maybe even thinking about a third parking garage. So we are teeing that discussion up now because people do like the covered parking. And if we were to do that, it would be north of the existing new garage, and it would have facilities where it would have elevators to take it, and so we would have one of the longest walkway tunnels around, I think. Not many airports have parking garages where you can get out of the weather and immediately into the terminal without being in the weather.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody else? Yeah, please.
First of all, I want to say, Mark, that I think you guys have really done a great job out there. Every time I come back from someplace and get to our airport, I appreciate it more. I mean, it's just a really, all the way from the aesthetics to the actual service itself is just improved so dramatically in the last several years, and I'm sure you're responsible for a great deal of that, and I appreciate it because it's become a really great asset. It's always been a good thing for Oklahoma City, but it's really become a kind of a star of an asset for Oklahoma City. But my question has to do with the fact that you talked about the concerns about volatility of revenues. I mean, and you listed a number of reasons for that. When I look at the use of funds thing, it shows that about 22% of the funds that come into the airport are used to pay debt. Is that a normal percentage for facilities like this, or how's that compared to the city's revenue to debt ratio? The reason I ask it is because you raised the question about the volatility of the revenue, and the first thing bad that can happen if you have volatile revenue is the revenue goes down, but the debt service doesn't follow it down. So.
Well, we ensure that the debt can be supported by revenues, and I'll say that if you have an airport, you're going to have debt. We have a total of about $140 million in total debt service now. Our debt coverage ratio is the best that it's been in years. The gross debt cover ratio is about 5.81, and the net is 3.12. We also have about $8 million, which will be sliced off of that. The senior lien debt for the Mike Maroney facilities that were constructed many years ago, 30 years ago, gets paid off. The last payment is October of this year. Additionally, there's a couple of other series that are going to be paid off. So the debt level ratio is the payments that are promised through either PFCs or revenues, which will be able to support those facilities. And
will that reduce that percentage of revenue to debt, or will it be that debt be taken up by other debt that's been issued that you'll just make higher payments on?
No, that debt will be gone, and our debt level ratio will just get better and better. Those revenues, we have $82 million of revenue that comes into the airport, and so you see there's $21 million that's for debt service.
Right.
So that leaves a lot for operations, and we even are able to contribute a significant amount of our operating revenue to our capital for each year.
How does that compare to airports across the country, other airports?
I don't know, but I think we do very well. When Public Financial Management was here a few weeks ago to talk about the customer service charge for our consolidated rental car facility, you may recall that he mentioned that the bond ratings for our junior lien and senior lien debt with Moody's and S&P were very, very good compared to most airports. So that's the only comparison that I can give you.
That's a good comparison.
Councilman White, I think this airport's a little bit different because of the FAA. I think if you take a look at our improvements out there and the debt for the operations of the airport, the parking and the terminal itself, we're probably low when you compare it to others. We have higher debt because of the FAA that's sitting out there. Most of the airports don't have a FAA that's being financed by the airport trust. So that's what puts us up. And so far, obviously, the federal government's been pretty reliable on payments.
Yes, sir. One other one I might mention is the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The airport has the bond financing for that. Now, that pays off in 2014. That will be a big relief.
Larry?
Yeah, not included in your 3.5 million passenger employment figures are roughly the 100,000 guests that we service every year through the FTC facility. Is that correct?
Yes, we had Con Air long before the movie. The U.S. Marshal Service every day goes back and forth to the jet bridges over at the Federal Transfer Center and transfers prisoners throughout the country using that facility. And
that's one of our best-kept economic secrets in Oklahoma City is the income generated off of that Federal Transfer Center. And the sad news is that's a growth business because the number of people being transported through there is directly related to the criminal activity in our country. And it is really dramatic when you figure over 100,000 people get processed through there in the current year.
All right. Did you say 100,000? Is processed through the federal transportation? Or
I'm not aware of the numbers, Councilman.
Okay. All right. Mark, thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that's our end of our presentations, departmental presentations for today. But a couple of weeks ago, when the police came to their presentation, I think Councilman White prompted a number of questions about the staffing at the police department, both during the time of day and also on the days of the week. And so Chief City is here this morning to provide some follow-up information regarding those issues that were raised a couple, 3 weeks ago.
Good morning. Lieutenant Clifton's passing out a copy of the presentation on the slides so that you can follow along with that if you'd like and have it to review a little bit more in detail later. Hopefully we'll try to keep this shorter than my budget presentations. But it does get kind of complicated, and I really want to make sure that you're clear on what you're looking at because it is pretty interesting. We'll start with this. I hate to read to you, but there's some things I want you to understand. It'll be a little bit redundant because I'll go back as we go through the slides and reiterate some of these, so you don't have to remember what the blue lines and purple lines and everything else are because I'll go back over that. The following slides that you're going to see depict 911 calls for service by hour of the day and day of the week for 3 years. That's 09, 10, and 11. So what you're going to see is you're going to see an average. You're going to see an average number of all those calls per day and per hour over the last 3 years that the officers took. The slides also show the average number of officers working
within these time periods for the 4 patrol divisions. So the number you're going to see is a combination of the average number of officers working for every division within the city. The responses are based on 911 calls, and they do not include any time to patrol high crime areas, conduct routine patrols, neighborhood patrols, traffic enforcement, or self-initiated activity. So all you're seeing is response, the numbers are response to calls that come into the 911 center and officers respond to. It doesn't include traffic stops, self-initiated calls, routine patrol, that type of stuff. The blue line that you will see in the slides will represent the total number of authorized officers assigned to work. That means that's how many officers actually are authorized, could be working, that are authorized. The purple line represents the average number of officers that are actually working. So the difference, you'll see the difference between the number of officers that could be working and the number of officers that are actually working. The actual number of officers working is reduced by such things as in-service training, special unit training, TAC team, bomb squad, emergency response teams, those types of things. Special assignment, military. We currently have 12 people activated right now on military leave. Injuries on duty. We currently have 18 that are either on light duty or actually off because of injuries on duty. We have administrative leave. That has to do with investigations that I may be doing, and I place somebody on administrative leave. Restricted light duty, vacation leave, FMLA leave, or sick leave. And currently we have 35 people that are on FMLA or sick leave. So that's a total, those are the total number of people that are not available. The next slide is just kind of giving you an example on a day in the life of the patrol division. And what you're going to look at is you're going to look at Hefner Division Shift 2. So you have one shift on Wednesday, April 11th, 2012. And this is just an example. This is an actual example on that day. The officers on their days off for that day, and keep in mind Wednesday's an overlap day, so we have access to the most of our officers on that day. So it's a full shift day with all the officers. But you have officers that are actually on their days off. You're going to have 15. Officers.
Chief, could I clarify that? Is Wednesday the only overlap day?
There are 3. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday are overlap days.
So we have the most of our officers available on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
You'll always have 2/3 of all the officers assigned to patrol division on one of those days, because they start on every day. On Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, there's one shift that starts their days off. So you have 2 other shifts, because we have 3 total shifts. So you'll have one shift that starts their days off and 2 shifts that will be available to work. So you'll always have available to you on a shift overlap day 2/3 of all the officers assigned to patrol division. So, and that's what you see here. On the officers' days off, 1/3 of that would be 15. The other 2/3 would be 27. So those are the officers on their days on that are available to work on that overlap day, or 27 officers on this particular shift. That's just one shift. Okay, the officers' days on are 27. Now that 27 number is reduced. For officers out in the field, it's reduced by these types of activities: law enforcement, driver training, in service. We have 2 officers on that shift that are in in-service training. So we try to do our in-service training, which we are required to do by about 25 hours a year, I believe it is. Isn't that right, Ken? 25 hours a year. But we also do additional training but we try to do all that on overlap days because we have the most officers and we can meet our minimum staffing levels. So you have driver training, there's 2 officers. Our Phase 1 in-service training, which is classroom training, we have 3 officers. Special day off for holiday work, our officers get 9 special days off a year because they have to work holidays, so you have to give it to them throughout the year. You have 2 officers on SDO leave. You have 2 officers on that shift on military leave. I told you before we had 12 total in the department. On this shift, there's 2. Light duty report taking means injury on duty. We try to at least put them to work. They can take reports over the phone if they can actually come to work. You have 1 officer that's on light duty. That means they're not available to take calls in the field, but they are taking calls over the telephone larcenies, those types of things we take over the telephone. And you have one officer on sick leave that called in sick, so you have a total of 16 officers on that shift for that particular day on an overlap day. And our minimum staffing is usually around 14. On most shifts, our minimum staffing is 14. So this is a full shift day, and even with the additional number of officers of 27, with the activities that we have, and with the sick leave and those types of things, we still we're just barely 2 above minimum of 16.
Chief, real quick, on your example, Hefner Shift 2, you got 5 people doing in-service training. I assume should some type of disaster or something happen, those people would be available to respond.
Obviously, if we have something that's major that they need to come out, we could do that. Okay, the next slide shows you, we're going to show you an orange dashed line, and I'll explain that, which represents the number of officers required after the 911 calls are weighted based on the priority level. For example, the priority 1 call, such as an armed robbery in progress, requires a minimum response of 3 officers. It's a priority 1, it's a higher level call. You think when we get a call, you think of 1 officer per call. That's not the case. If you have a high priority call, like an armed robbery in progress, you don't want 1 officer going to that. You have we require a minimum of 3 officers responding to that. So you're going to see in one line where we weight those calls, the number of priority calls within the total number of calls and how many officers we think we need. However, if the suspect of the armed robbery was no longer at the scene, the call could be assigned as a priority 2, and when we downgrade it to a 2, it only require 2 officers to go and investigate that crime. Where the orange dash line is above the purple line, and I'll explain to it when we get into it, the data suggests the number of officers available is insufficient to respond to calls based on their priority in a safe and timely manner. The second series of slides contain a green line that will represent a percentage of priority 1 calls responded to in 9 minutes and 30 seconds. Our leading for results goal is to respond to those priority 1 calls within 9 minutes and 30 seconds 90% of the time. Currently, we're doing it at about 71, 72% of the time, and that's been an average over the years. Below that, you'll see our patrol hours, just for your information. Our patrol shifts, 1 is 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our second shift is 4 p.m. to 2 a.m., so you can see there's an hour overlap there between 1 and 2. And then you have third shift, which is 9:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m., so you see an overlap between 9:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning when the second shift goes off for the department. The weighted calls, the way we do it, we have specific calls. Priority 1 calls take 3 officers. Priority 2 calls, 2 officers. Priority 3 takes 1.5 officers. And priority 4, 5, and 6 take 1 officer. And those are the numbers we used in the staffing study when we did it and how we decided, because the consultant wanted us to weight every call and how many officers we'd need to respond to those calls to get a true determination of how many officers we would need.
And Chief, every patrol car has 1 officer in it?
1 per car.
1 per car.
Excuse me. All right, here's the first slide. You can see where the blue line, the top line, is going to be the number of officers that are available for the department. These are all shifts. These are all officers. This line is all officers on Mondays per hour. The officers that would be available versus the officers that are actually working. The blue line would be the actual officers that would be available to work. So you can see the gap between the officers available to work and the officers that are actually working, which is the purple line. And again, those things are affected by sick leave, vacation, days off, those types of things. You can see the dashed line is going to be a line that weights the calls. Now, the actual line represents officers, the number of officers if they're weighted for priority 1 calls. Because what you're looking at in the blue chart, the blue line, the blue bars right there are going to be the actual number of calls on a Monday for 3 years. Those are for that day on a Monday. For instance, if you're looking at, let's take one that's right at 50. If you look at 9 a.m. on a Monday for the 3 years of 09, 10, and 11, we get 50 calls on a Monday at 9 o'clock. Overall, that's all calls, burglaries, all priorities, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so and then the purple line above it shows the actual number of officers that are actually out in the field working. Once you hit the cursor on that, can you bring up the actual number on that line? You can't do it on this? Okay. As an example, the actual number, well, it's close to about 52 or 53 at, say, 9 a.m. on that day. And the actual number, if you weighted the calls, with the number of priority calls you're going to look up at the orange dotted line, is going to be the actual number of officers you need during that hour to respond to all those calls, including the priority one. Because obviously you've got some priority one calls or priority two calls in there where you need more than one officer. Therefore, it's going to show that you need more officers than you actually have in the field. Now, this isn't exact, so you can't say, okay, we need this many more officers on Mondays specifically, because this only shows how many officers you need, taking into consideration the number of officers you need are within that hour. But you also got to remember a priority one call may be not a priority one call, and you pull two officers, if not all officers, off the call. So over an average, it's probably pretty close, but it's not an exact number to make a determination on how many officers you'll need on that particular day at that particular hour. This just gives you an idea of the number of 911 calls if you weight them, and how many probably officers you're probably low during that period of time. But it's not an exact number. Plus, you have to remember it's all calls. This is all calls for service, and it does not include an officer that may be on a traffic stop, an officer that may be stuck on a traffic stop or may be stuck on other things that he's not able to respond to those calls. So this doesn't take all those types of things into consideration. It only takes calls received through CAD and the number of officers you have out there to respond to those calls. If you look at the lines...
If I understand this correctly, though, Chief, and please tell me if I've got this wrong, but the orange line where it intersects either the purple or the blue would indicate a place where we don't have enough officers out in the field.
Right. The purple line shows you the number of officers working that day. And once that orange line goes above that, it's assuming we don't have enough officers to respond during that period of time. If it's below that, we do.
So it may be somewhat irrelevant, but on this Monday slide, only in two very small windows at the corners of the blue line in that peak time period, do we not have enough officers authorized to be out in the field?
Or enough officers actually working, but authorized. Now, if you look at the blue line, is the number that are authorized. Right. But you're always going to have officers off. Again, that takes into consideration military leave, sick leave, vacation time. You're always going to have a certain number of officers off. And we require a minimum staffing level, and it averages that. They're different in a little bit different in each division, but they average around 14 or 15 officers is our minimum staffing level. And that's based on the fact that we want to make sure we have an officer in every district within that division. Now, you have 11 districts in some divisions. The highest one is Will Rogers. You have 14 districts. So you want to make sure you have a minimum of 14 officers working that day, so at least you have one officer to respond. Now, that doesn't mean they stay in that district, because they'll move depending on what the priority calls. You got one officer in one district, and he's got a robbery. You obviously have to pull officers from other districts, which leaves that district without an officer in it for a period of time.
Right. And I don't want to interrupt your presentation. I know you've got a lot to cover, but I guess that, the thought that comes immediately to mind is how well we're managing the difference between authorized and actually working officers, and if there are things that we could do to shift some of those things into different time periods where we're not so.
Right, and we have discussed that, and we have more officers. You'll see in here when you get to the next slide. Now, it's not a lot, but you'll see if you compare like Monday and Friday, both Monday and Friday are overlap days, or non-overlap days. And you'll see the numbers that will actually go down on Friday over a Monday when you have a higher priority number of calls. I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here, but since you asked the question, why is that? Because we still have, we want more officers working on Friday because you're going to see where our response times drop on Fridays, but it's due to the fact that officers will call in sick, officers want their vacation time, they want their SDOs, and you've got to give them a certain amount of that because they want the weekends off. And so you're actually going to see a lower number of people working on the weekends. We're still meeting minimum staffing where we have somebody in every district, but you still have fewer officers on that weekend because they want the time off. And if they don't get the time off, in many cases you will see, and there's certain studies that have shown, you'll see officers will take it. They'll call in sick, and there's not. I mean, if they call in sick a day or two, you're really kind of handcuffed with that. So, it's kind of the reality of trying to manage because people are going to take off and do need some time off and get to take their vacation, those types of things. There's probably some things that are abused, but I don't think it's to the extent that you see a huge difference that's going to impact your responding to your calls for service. You'll also see on here, if you look on this chart right here, you'll see at about 7 o'clock, you see the actual number of officers jumps to about 53 or 54 from your night shift. Day shift has more officers on their shift than third shift does because it's needed, because of your calls for service. So you'll see more officers, and when you're talking about managing the number of your people, you're going to see more officers on day shift assigned to day shift than you do third shift. Then you see more officers assigned to second shift because your priority calls go up during second shift. You're going to see more officers on second shift than you will on day shift or on third shift. So your highest number of officers are actually working second shift, where you're going to have the higher number of overall calls and the higher number of priority one calls. Because if you look on this, you'll see where it starts. You actually see the calls for service to really start to go up around, say, noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, until you actually peak at 5 o'clock. And the reason for that is, one, people are getting up and they're going to work, starting at, say, 6 o'clock. So you're going to see the rise in calls as people start coming to work. You have accidents that have to be worked, because these do include accidents where they call in and say, we need a car to work the accident. So you see people coming to work, you see more activity because people are asleep, obviously, and then until it peaks about 5 o'clock, and 5 o'clock is when people are going home. You see there's several reasons for that on overall calls. One is, again, traffic accidents. They're going home from work. You have more accidents. We see a peak number of calls, plus they're getting home. So they're getting home and they're finding out their house has been burglarized, something like that while they're gone, so we get a call to go take burglary reports and respond to those types of calls. You'll also see the priority one calls go up if you're talking about people going home or domestics or those types of things, which are a higher priority call. You'll see those high priority calls also go up during that same time period. So if you look at that staffing, it's almost, we could probably say, okay, instead of having 14 officers, one in each division, let's say we're going to have 3 additional, let's have 17. Most of the time, we think we're still going to end up with about the same number, especially on the weekends, because people are going to they're going to call in sick if we don't give them some time off. We could manage it a little bit, probably, and do that, but we think it's probably, and it's the same thing with changing overlap days. We think with changing overlap days, we're still going to see a heavier impact of people calling in sick and wanting those weekends off, because what you see the staffing falls by a few people on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, but then it goes back up a little on Monday. Well, because they're willing to come back on Monday. They want off the weekends with their families. That's the thing you run into when you start talking about that scheduling. So anyway, I mean, that's, we agree that those types of things really have to be looked at. But again, on overlap days, we try to schedule a lot of other activities like training. TAC team training, for instance, they have to train every month for 3 days. So we've got 20, how many do we have on the TAC team now? 35 people that are off 3 days a week on those overlap days. Then we have our emergency response teams that deal with crowd control and those types of things that train once a quarter, and they're off, I think, about several days, 3 days maybe. ERT. Bomb squad trains 3 days. So you have those types of things where people are actually going to be off, and there's not much you can do about that. On this chart where you see the really high peak, it's a little bit misleading, because that's the overlap. That's an hour overlap is all that is. Between the day shift and the second shift coming on, there's an hour overlap. So you'll see that many officers during that time period. And then when you see the increase at about 9 o'clock, which is actually 9:30, that's when third shift comes on. So that's when you have overlap with officers up till 2 o'clock. So you have a higher number of officers on during that time. Now I'll show you, we'll go through the rest of the weekday, which will go by quicker now that you maybe understand that. But is there any other questions? Does everybody kind of understand what we're looking at here to a certain extent, hopefully? Okay. If we go to Tuesday, you're going to see basically the same trend. Although now you see that purple line goes up a little bit over Monday because now you're into an overlap day. So you see more officers that are available with the blue line, and you see more officers actually working with the purple line. And then you see the line, you see the actual calls for service actually stay pretty much the same. You see including the priority 1 calls that are included in the total number will stay pretty much the same. So you don't see much change other than the fact you see a few more officers working on Tuesday. Wednesday, we go to the same thing. Still not much change. Staffing stays about the same. It's an overlap day. You go to Thursday. Now you're starting to see a little bit of change on Thursday. And the change you're going to see is you're going to see the total number of calls start to go up slightly. You kind of have to look at it pretty closely based on the calls for service, but the calls do go up on Thursday. Plus, when we get to the priority 1 calls, you'll see where the 911 calls also start going up on Thursdays. I mean, 911, the priority 1 calls start going up on Thursday. So otherwise, the trend in both the staffing and the weighted calls, the staffing for weighted calls in the orange dotted line, the trend is still basically the same. And again, that's still an overlap day. Now we go to Friday, staffing level comes down some because it's no longer an overlap day. So your staffing available and your actual staffing on duty have dropped. That trend line on the weighted calls, they're going to go above. Obviously, you have less staff. That's not going to change too much, so they're actually going to go. It's going to be a little bit higher versus the actual number of staff that you have on. Plus, on Friday, starting on Thursday and Friday, you'll see where the priority 1 calls are also going up in this, as well as the overall calls. Let's go to Saturday. Saturday, you can see where the overall calls are going up. The lines are staying pretty much the same. And what I was talking about earlier on Friday and Saturday, go back to Friday. Friday's the first day that you don't have, that you no longer have the overlap. But the interesting thing here is not that it drops. To me, the interesting thing was that line drops below that 50. Now, it may be 1 officer, it may be 2 officers, but if you compare that to the Monday, flip back to the Monday real quick, you can see where the line's at 50 on day shift. So on Friday, when you actually probably need more officers working, it dips below that 50. We're still making minimum staffing. We're still above minimum staffing levels, but it's up a little bit on Monday. You now go back to Friday. And it just, and what the indicator here is that officers want off Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They want to go to the lake, they want to take some time off, they want to be with their families, whatever they want to do. That's when they're requesting more vacation time, or they're taking more sick leave, that type of thing. And I don't want to imply that officers are abusing sick leave. I'm just saying you're going to have a few officers that do. And even if it drops one or two, you'll see where that impacts our response to priority 1 calls when we get to that slide. It's amazing how much it impacts it, but 1 or 2 or 3 officers can impact our response times pretty significantly, especially when your overall calls for service are going up, and they are when you get into Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Saturday, let's go to Saturday. You can see where the calls for service, once you get up now to, on the calls for service, when you don't have that huge peak at where you see 1,700 hours at 5 o'clock, people are home on Saturdays. So that comes down a little bit. You don't have traffic accidents, you don't have those things that occur while people are getting off work. They don't come home and find their home burglarized because they've been home all day, that type of thing. So you start seeing that flatten out, although those calls go up, overall calls go up when you get to Friday and Saturday after that 5 o'clock hour up till about 11 o'clock. And then they'll start dropping a little bit. But you'll see the overall calls are actually going up. And again, the orange line stays, the trend stays fairly consistent through really through the whole 7 days. Okay, Sunday. Sunday, you'll see the calls now are starting to go down. Sundays, obviously, it's not as busy. Our officers actually, the number of officers working actually kind of peaks back up to that 50, comparable to what you'll see on Monday. So you have Friday and Saturday when officers want off is when you see it dip a little bit. And again, it's only a couple officers, but as you'll see where it makes a difference, especially when the calls are going up. Now let's go to the next set of slides. And we couldn't put this all. We tried to look at putting this all on one slide, but the scales are so much different. You really can't do that and get the benefit of having it all on one slide, and it's too busy. This slide represents, now you've gone from seeing all the calls for service per hour on a Monday to seeing just our priority 1 calls, our top priority 1 calls. These are the life may be at risk. You have serious calls that you have to have 3 officers go to. So when you go back and you think about the orange line, that orange line is based on these number of calls you're seeing right here on Monday. Go back to Monday. No, forward. Thanks. That line, that orange line, is based on responding to these calls that you're looking at right now. These are strictly the number of priority 1 calls. And you see the scale on the right starts at 0, and the highest number of priority 1 calls that we have, say, on a Monday is at 8 o'clock at night, and it's somewhere between 3.5 to 4 calls on a Monday for those 3 years on average. That's how many calls during that hour priority 1 calls we'll have. If you go to 5 o'clock in the morning, you're looking at less than half, less than 0.5 number of priority 1 calls. So the scale's a lot different, a lot smaller. And the percentage on your left goes from 0 to 90%. And remember, our target's 90%. We haven't reached that. There's no way we'll reach that without not adding more officers. But that's what we decided we should be doing on the priority 1 calls when we did the staffing study with the consultant. You'll see that our current average is about 71 or 72%. So for the most part on Monday, we're above what our current average is, and in some cases we're above the 90%. This is Monday. You'll see a significant dip at 7 o'clock. Now that is a management issue. We've identified really we knew it was a problem, but this shows what kind of problem it is. That 7 o'clock, that dip, is basically officers getting off shift and not wanting to take a call and get stuck on a priority 1 call. They want to go home at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's a management issue. We've been working at addressing that. We actually changed some policies and procedures at 911 to actually assign those calls, and we've done that within the last year, haven't we, Ken? So we have to reevaluate these stats at the end of this year and see if we've improved that. But we know that's been a problem because officers don't want to take, and even a priority one call, we've got to do a better job. That's why you see the significant dip. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. You see basically the same trend on Tuesday. Again, this is an overlap day, so you have a few more officers working although you see basically the same kind of trend in how well we're responding to calls percentage-wise. Remember, the left side's percentage, so we're responding to, let's take an hour, let's say at 7 o'clock in the morning, we're responding to a little over one priority one call on Monday mornings at about 72% of the time. So, but you have to take consideration that officers may be tied up on other priority one calls, those types of things. Even at that point, that's going to affect our ability to respond to those calls. And again, that dip, also there's other reasons for that, and that is a management issue in managing our personnel. Let's go to Wednesday. You'll see also same kind of trend. We're doing pretty well on our response times on Wednesday. On Wednesdays, it's an overlap day. We have more officers working. Our priority one calls are still, they're starting to go up a little bit, but they're still about, they're not as high as you'll get into when you get into Thursday and Friday. Thursday, you'll see, yeah. You have the Thursday, you have the hard copy on the Thursday. Everybody will turn to the hard copy if we don't have it in this. Do you have it in the slide? Otherwise, just go to Friday, Jason, and we'll look at the Thursday. Okay, we have the hard copy in your handout or should. You're going to see now, you're going to see a little bit of change on Thursday. Where you're going to, and the reason for Thursday is going to be that the number of your priority one calls is going up. You're going to see where that line starting about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, our response times are starting to dip, or starting to go down because you have more priority one calls. That's also the thing on Thursday. If you look at the overall calls on Thursday, you've got more overall calls. So you have two things affecting that. You have more priority one calls, and you have more overall calls. So you have officers that are taking a call on a burglary when a priority one call may come out and they're not available. So our response times are a little bit less or a little bit slower. So those overall calls affect that. Friday. Let me see Friday. There we go. Friday, you see where our response times, I mean, we're responding, in some cases we're responding to a little over 50% or at 50% on our priority one calls. And again, now you're no longer on an overlap day. You're probably going to have 2 or 3 less officers working because you don't have the number of officers available to you because you're no longer in an overlap day. Plus, at the same time, your overall calls for service are going up and your priority one calls are going up. All of those affect our ability to respond to those priority one calls more quickly. So the Friday number, you can see where our response times really dip. On Saturday, but keep in mind you're looking at, on some of those calls, this scale, you're only looking at 3 or 4 priority one calls, but they're still prioritized. And that, if you have 4 priority one calls, it may take 12 officers to respond to that call, those 4 calls. Because remember, you have 3 officers for every priority one call. On Saturday, pretty much the same. You have kind of the same pattern. And then on Sunday, it starts to go back to what you're going to see on Monday during the week, Sunday morning. You see the calls pretty low, our response time's pretty low, and again, it has to do with the number of calls, the number of officers working. And then it goes back up when you get into Sunday afternoon. Our actual number, if you remember, our actual number of officers goes back up on Sunday. We have a couple more. You may have only a couple, 2 or 3, but it makes a difference when you're responding to all your calls and your priority 1 calls. So where you see the number of officers going down slightly Friday and Saturday is when you see our numbers dip most significantly. And I think that is it. Those are the slides we have in the presentation. I hope I've answered some calls. I mean some of your questions. It's a challenge, and again, we know that the Friday and Saturday is an issue. And when you talk about overlap days, that affects it to a certain extent. But it also, I hope you can see where, in many cases, regardless of what we do with the overlap days, because if we were to change our overlap days, we're still going to have to schedule in-service. We're still going to have those types of issues where we're going to have not the number that you might think we have if we do it. It still infects sex. If you have 2 or 3, as you can see up here, really these numbers don't lie. These are the actual numbers. It affects Friday and Saturday and our ability to be able to respond to those priority 1 calls with the actual number of officers that we have, even if it's 2 or 3 officers.
All right, comments, Pete?
On the example you give, Chief, about from Wednesday, April 11th, you show 5 officers that on that shift to be, as Gary pointed out, in some form of in-service training. Would it be the same on Saturday? Would you have when you have more officers available? Wouldn't you lose fewer officers to that? Off that list of reasons that you lose officers and the number, when you lose fewer on Saturdays and Fridays nights?
The overlap, if you were to change the overlap days, let's take it for example, let's say that Wednesday would be a Saturday. Those same type of things would occur. We still have to do training on Saturday.
And you do it on Saturday?
We'd have to do it on Saturday, which makes it a little bit more difficult for us, but we can do that because that's been some of the arguments. Well, you can't train. TAC team can't. You've got TAC team training, you've got in-service training. It means my staff has to move a lot of training to Saturdays. We use a lot of people out of the field because not only are you losing, and this doesn't reflect this, but you lose 5 people off that shift to go to in-service training, but I may have 1 or 2 people off another shift that are actually doing that training. Because my training staff, when we do in-service, we don't keep a full staff out there to do in-service training. It would be a waste of manpower. We pull people off the street that are actual trainers to do that training. So now they're off their shift. And they would still have to be pulled off on all that would have to be done on Saturday.
But it would make more sense. Excuse me. It just seems to me if you're going to do that, it would make more sense to pull them off their job on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday than it would be to do it on Saturday.
We don't have the staffing. We try to do it when we have the most staffing so we don't affect that bottom line of the actual number of officers. When we have the most officers working...
So I should conclude that this is the best we can do, that having more people on the job on Monday is more important than having more people on the job on Saturday. Is that the conclusion for this?
No. Actually, the conclusion is just the opposite. You probably need more people on Saturday and Friday.
But the only solution to that is to hire more people because for one reason or another, if you make people work on Saturday, they will not show up.
No, I'm saying, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you probably will have more people if you were to change overlap days. This is not an argument. I'm not making an argument against overlap. I'm making the argument here. The data shows that overlap would still help add some additional people to Fridays and Saturdays. It's not going to be the number that we think it is, and our concern is, there's two concerns I have with overlap. And I'm just throwing this out, and then most of it's theory. The one concern is you have more people that want those, because more people want weekends off. I think we show this, because even on non-overlap days, people are wanting to take off for whatever reason. So Friday and Saturday, that's just human nature. So that is one concern, although we haven't had a huge concern with that, nor have we had a concern with doing our training on the weekends, because we can make that happen. We can make that work. I think you would still, in theory, still raise your numbers to a little bit higher level. You may have, say on say that Wednesday, if it were on a Saturday, you'd still would probably have a couple more officers working during that time period. You're not going to have 10 more officers working that time period.
But the reverse of that was you talked earlier about how impactful it is on the numbers if you have one or two people.
Correct.
One or two would impact the numbers substantially.
Right, but the difference you see on the largest impact on Monday compared to a Friday, there's two things that are impacting that. You have one or two more officers working on a Monday, and you have less overall calls, and you have less priority one calls.
Right.
So you have two things impacting that. On Friday, you're going to have more overall calls and more priority one calls, but then you may have a few more officers, so it's going to negate some of, you're not going to have still that huge increased response time, or percentage-wise, you're not going to have that huge increase that you see on Monday. You'll see some, but you're not going to see it.
I can understand that we wouldn't get
right
one-to-one kind of, I can understand that, but it doesn't change my view that we ought to take a long, hard look at it and try to do it.
No, I don't disagree. There are things the chief worries about. I mean, I've been supportive. The staffing study says you should change your overlap days. It's hard for me to argue with that, and it's hard for me to argue with what these numbers show. That's, I can't argue with that. The other things that you don't see, the training, the issue of sick leave, and then one other thing that's come up that I really have a concern about is special events. Right now, with special events, they've like tripled because of all the good things that are going on in Oklahoma City. We don't put full-time officers in Bricktown or in those areas all the time because you don't need them. It would be a waste of manpower. So what you do is you add people like we've done, and more people like we've done recently in overtime. You put overtime officers in there. Well, where do those overtime officers come? They come from your officers are on their days off. So, and when do the events and activities occur, the majority of them? We have them all week, but when do they really peak? They peak on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays.
So for overtime, you can get plenty of officers. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is it's getting harder. It's getting harder and harder because we have so much overtime and we need so many officers. For this weekend, for example, we raised the number of overtime officers that we wanted, and we try to do that versus pulling people off the street because I don't want to impact the neighborhoods. I don't want to impact our gang officers having to work those special neighborhoods that are having problems and pulling them down to Bricktown. That's not fair to those neighborhoods, so we don't do that. We try to hire the overtime. We put overtime in there. My concern, and it's only in theory, my concern is that if we have fewer officers on their days off on the weekends, then I have a smaller pool to pull from for overtime. And it's already gotten to the point now where they're down to the wire, in many cases like we were last weekend, almost begging officers to work overtime. And it's...
Chief, I think uniformly everybody on this horseshoe thinks we need more police officers. I don't think there's anybody around the horseshoe that wouldn't like to see us increase the number of police officers substantially. What I do think, though, is we'd like to do that in conjunction with making sure we utilize the people we add and the people we already have to the highest efficiency that we can reach. I don't think there's anybody. I think you could poll all of us, and if we had the money, and we will have the money to do it, you'd find 9 votes for let's have more officers. I don't think that's a question at all.
Well, one of the things we talked about is if we're going to change overlap days, which I still think's a good idea, or some form of overlap, maybe not all 3 days, but as a compromise, maybe at least on a Friday or some of those other days, but is to do that in conjunction with being able to hire more officers, because the overtime issue then would become less of a concern of mine because we would actually be putting more officers into the pool as we're changing those overlap days, because that's my only concern now is we're struggling.
I personally think that's possible. I think that's, but that's only 1 out of 9. So we'll have to get everybody else to amen that. But I believe that's possible. I believe that a combination of those things is something that this council would find very attractive, I think.
Well, and that's really my comment, Chief, and I think you and I have talked about this, but for 10 years, I ran a business that was 7 days a week, 364 days a year, and every ad I ran to hire an employee said must be able to work weekends. And if you couldn't work weekends, you weren't eligible for the job.
Right.
This is same thing. This happens to be a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day, 365-day-a-year job. You have to be able to work weekends in order to be able to do this job. So just one comment, and I think the other thing that probably is most surprising to those of us that don't do your job on a regular basis is if I look at this Wednesday shift correctly, the front page, we should have total available 42 officers, and yet we have 16 in the field.
Right.
That's 38% of our folks that are employed by us and are paid by us that are not able to work for all those reasons. Everybody needs days off. Everybody needs training. We understand that, but the perception, I think, of the general population is that would be shocking to have only 38%. If I only had 38 of the people in my office working, I'd have to shut the doors.
Well, but you have to take some things in consideration. I've got 38 people I have 12 people that are IOD that are injured on duty. Now, just for that shift on that day, or overall, I have 12. For the whole department. Then you have 38 people that are on FMLA or sick leave or something. I can't control that. That's a huge percentage. And then you have 12 people on military leave. And then you have, and actually we should be training about 40 hours mandatory. We've got so much training we need these officers to do, and that in-service and ongoing training is what keeps us professional. And we don't do enough of that. You also have to take into consideration that when you're looking at manpower is that it doesn't include, we do on the average about 25% now is what the study showed, and that study was based on back on 2006 numbers. 25% is proactive. That means patrolling. And we should be doing nationally probably about 40% patrolling, stopping traffic, writing tickets, and those types of things. So when you look at the staffing study, the number of officers that was suggested, that part of that time was built into that. So, but you really, it's not just some of the things that I listed. You really have, there's so many things that affect that staffing. And then you give a few people, you may only be looking at a couple people that are getting their time off, a vacation time, and you can't really deny that. And you have a problem with some injuries because they're in a very tough job. They get physically hurt in their job. So there's things that some of those things you can't control, and I think if you really dig down to it, there may be a very small percentage of that is abused and that we try to deal with. But overall, you're going to find that most of those officers that are off, either in training, sick, everything else, is a pretty legitimate number. So.
Several council people want to talk. Why don't we just start this way and go around the room, and we'll make one more pass, and then we'll let the chief go. Gary?
There's just a couple of points I want to make, and this is primarily for our viewing audience, because they're probably sitting out there going, well, why don't they just change it? It seems the simple issue of, they'll just change it. And this applies to both of our public safety agencies, because you can go into fire and you can see the same thing. You can see scheduling issues, you can see time of year, summertime versus wintertime, you can see all kinds of things. The schedule, this overlap schedule and the scheduling of shifts and all that is a contractual issue. It sits inside the union contract, and that's not something that can be arbitrarily done without a negotiation. And I want the public to understand that. So that's one issue that's out there. But being the only elected official sitting up here that's worked this issue for a long number of years, I can give you both sides of the story. As any good politician, I can work both sides of this thing. So the employee wants to tell you that they want weekends off because that's when their spouses are off, that's when their children are not in school, that's when their friends are off, that's when their family is off, that's when the normal, I shouldn't say normal, but when the average person is off and they want to enjoy doing things, that's the time that they need to be off so they can enjoy somewhat of a business lifestyle, so to speak. So it is important to them to think about having those weekends off. And they want the benefit of having that, as well as the benefit of being a city employee and what comes along with that. Management's frustration, and I think what you're seeing from council's frustration, is that all of these employees voluntarily joined what they knew was a public safety agency that was open for business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if you didn't want to put up with a different schedule than the rest of the world, you should have looked somewhere else to be employed. Because we count on public safety to be there 24 hours a day, every day of the year, to take care of those services. So you can make a case for both sides of this thing, and I think that's a point that the chief's trying to make in some instances, and that's a point that the two unions are going to make when we get into negotiating changes in schedule and changes in staffing issues. But I just want to make sure that the public understands both sides of that story out there, and that they understand that it has to be a contractual issue also.
Just another industry that has to have 24/7 staffing is healthcare, hospitals. I mean, they address this typically by giving incentives for working the less desirable, the overnights, the weekends. I mean, they have the same concerns Gary's talking about. Do we offer incentives for weekends or those times that we're trying to get additional staffing, or we just pay the same for overnight? Or
We do not work any incentives for working weekends, because right now our overlaps are on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and there had been some discussion, if they were, that you would pay some type of differential pay for having to, say, work a Friday and Saturday overlap versus a Thursday overlap. We do pay incentives for shift. Shift differential is paid based on whether or not you get more for working night shift than you do second shift, because night shift obviously is very hard on you health-wise. So, and there are studies to bear that out, and that's why the agreement was made to pay differential.
And then just to follow up on what Gary was saying, can you help me understand, and also the public, I mean, I don't want to get into labor negotiations, but can you just help me and the public understand what kind of decisions here could be just made and what have to be negotiated?
I can't change any of the shifts without negotiating those with the Fraternal Order of Police. By state law, any change in working conditions, a change in their hours would be a working condition, would have to be negotiated and agreed upon with the FOP. And this was done originally when the 10-hour shift was made back in the early 90s, or late, I can't remember exactly when, but in the early 90s, the overlap day was on the weekends. And it was changed. It was changed, I think, in 92, 93. The chief made the decision to give them, so that more people would have the weekends off, to give them the overlap days on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays.
So changing the overlap day would have to be negotiated,
yes, sir,
as well?
Okay. It would have to be.
Thank you. Bill, my knowledge of law enforcement is kind of constrained by just watching Blue Blood, CSI, and NCIS on TV, but I do have some manufacturing experience, and it seems to me, going on what Ed just said, there's no way that we can change shifts without negotiation, but what we can do up at this body up here is we can increase the total available capacity that you have by increasing the number of officers that we fund, say, next fiscal year. Is that true?
Yes.
So we're looking at funding 10 additional officers, plus we're looking at funding some additional white collar that we're going to take out of some uniformed officers that are currently doing what I'll call white collar jobs. That might be a bad definition, and moving them to the field. And we're talking about a total staffing increase, increasing capacity by a total of how many people?
It's a total of 22. It's actually 15 sworn, and I think there's 7 non-sworn.
So we're increasing our capacity by a total of 22.
Yes.
And out of that 22, we're not going to get full 100% utilization for all the reasons that you've talked about. And this is the same whether you're in the manufacturing business or in the police business. You have training, you have sick leave, you have these different vacations that have to be figured in. But we do have the authority on this council to increase that 22 to 33 or 44 or 55 and give you more capacity at your disposal to manage within the constraints of our bargaining agreement.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you, sir.
Councilman Shadid asked a question that I was going to ask in reference to differential pay and additional pay for certain shifts. And the other question is, Chief, you mentioned that when you have training that you have to have your officers who are experts in particular areas to be the training staff. What percentage of training do you all have that is not conducted by your in-house staff or personnel?
It just depends on the training. You may have legal issues where we use somebody from the district attorney's office that will come over, and you may have new warrants, new laws. We may have our legal staff comes over and does some training on legal issues, but so a lot of our training staff will also do a lot of that in-house at the training center. But if you have, like, let's take example, we have so many. They have to qualify twice a year with their firearm. I have 2 or 3 instructors, full-time instructors at our gun range that handle that. But when you have that many officers, you have to have anywhere from probably 8 to 10 that you have to pull from the field to safely do that training. When we do driver training, which we started when we changed our pursuit policies, we have maybe 8 instructors that are trained in tactical driving to come out and assist our training staff. We have a training staff from our full-time training center that oversees the training, but then we have to use it. It's the most efficient way to use that rather than having a full-time staff. I can't give you the percentage. It just depends on the different types of classes that we have.
Just a question, and Chief, I won't hold you to this number, but several of my colleagues have talked about additional officers to resolve this problem. In rough numbers, how many additional officers would you need to have to level out some of these staffing problems that we've got?
Well,
not counting the 15 that you're going to add this year.
The staffing study that we conducted now is becoming somewhat dated, and it was actually done based on 2006. But the staffing study had anywhere from 150 to 300 officers. If you really narrow that down and you want to really simplify things, and you look at all the reasons that he took into consideration for additional personnel, you're looking at anywhere from probably around 2 to 2.2 officers per 1,000. If you break that down. If you look at an average of major cities, some of our peer cities and others, you'll look at probably an average of somewhere between 2 and 2.2, and in many cases it's closer now to 2.2, even with some of the cuts that were made because of the economic downturn. Some of those cuts, most of those cities had added the officers back, and in many cases they never really occurred, even though they were having to make them. But you're looking at, if you look at 2.2 officers per 1,000 right now, just based on our numbers, with about a population of about 580,000, you're looking at around 200 officers. If you're looking at less than that, at 2, you're looking at about 100 officers. If you're looking at 2 per 1,000, so the only problem with that too is that. And I know a lot of cities have done it, but a lot of things that you do in prevention, a lot of things that you'd like to do, that number doesn't take that into consideration. There's a lot of things that we need to increase that number that the staffing study didn't take into consideration. I'll give you a good example. When I worked at Vice 30 or 28 years ago, and I can still remember it, but it's 28 years ago, we had 4 people in Vice. Today, we have 4 people in Vice. And that number needs to be about 12 people. I mean, the vice and with all the things that are occurring in the city, those types of things they need to be dealing with, whether it's alcohol-related or, prostitution and those types of things, we need our vice officers working. And that's just one area. Narcotics hasn't changed. We haven't increased our staffing in narcotics. There's a lot of areas that, we probably need to be doing a better job on, having more proactive enforcement units in the field. We have the gang units that handle gangs, but if I have a serial robberies or serial rapists, I need special units that probably should be out in the field doing nothing but trying to work on those specific, and a lot of the major cities have those, but we don't. That's prevention. That's being more proactive. And a lot of these numbers don't take that into consideration. If you're looking at 200 or 100, you're looking at specifically field officers and responding, and also adding some detectives to investigations, which is also needed. So,
I don't have a calculator, Chief, so what approximate number do we have officers per 1,000 right now? If our goal was...
About a little over 1.8, maybe 1.82.
Not quite to 2.
No, we're pretty low. If you look at us and compared to major cities, if you're simplifying it and looking at officers per 1,000, we're low. Okay. And plus we have less miles to cover.
If by some miraculous way we could find a pot of gold for these additional officers, how long would it take you to staff up from, say, 1.8 right now to 2.2?
If we had 200 officers today, it'd take us about a minimum of 4 years. We can train about 50 officers additional a year. Because we have to, that would be holding 2 classes, because we can hold a class at about 50. That's pushing it, but we can do that. And we have, our attrition rate was running, it's high this year because of certain things that are going on with the pension system, but usually our average is we lose about 35 a year. So it's going to take 2 classes to keep both our vacancies filled and then hire new officers.
You have to have roughly 100 recruits a year to maintain the staffing you have, and then
add
provide
200
additional growth.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Approximately how many officers, Chief, do you have in the gang unit?
In the gang unit, I have about 16. I have 2 shifts. I have 2 shifts that work opposite shifts, so we have 8. We have 8 gang officers in the field at any one time. Now that's not 20. That's only 10 hours a day. That's from peak hours, and they're pretty flexible depending on if we have any specific problems. We can change those hours so that they can address those.
Can I ask a follow-up question? You talked about special events, and people are debating now and trying to figure out process what happened with Thunder Alley. Can you talk about what kind of strain that put on us and would have put on us to manage 8,000 people if that had continued? Or was
we had already, prior to the shooting incident, we had already added additional officers just because of the crowds and some of the things that were happening within that crowd that's really hasn't been discussed. We already saw a kind of a deterioration of the activities within that crowd. So even prior to the shooting and the incident happening, we had set up some discussions to discuss if it was going to continue to happen, then what we need to do to better make sure that the people are safe, not only outside, but also that are attending the event inside. Because it created a lot of different problems. Huge strain. It was really an unmanageable type situation. And even if you restricted access and entry, it would still become unmanageable just because the screen was, you could view it from all the way down, Robinson and over in the Myriad Gardens and so on and so forth. So it became it was becoming a problem. It puts a huge strain. In other words, if you have that many people in that many areas and it's growing with that type of activity, you're going to have to add more overtime officers. And probably what we ended up doing that night is actually having to pull officers off the street that were actually working. And that, if you look at that particular day, you'd see our calls for service numbers, our percentage drop in the time we get to calls because we had to pull so many downtown, not just for the activities on Thunder Alley, but also for the shooting that occurred.
Chief, thank you.
Okay.
Ready to adjourn the Finance Committee? All right, we'll adjourn the Finance Committee, reconvene the council meeting. We have several people that have signed up to speak. I think most of them signed up to, I know, but I'm going to discuss that right here. We have several people that have signed up to speak, but I'm suspecting you'd rather speak under citizens to be heard than under the public hearing under the budget. You're welcome to speak at either time, and both of them will almost be back-to-back, but just for procedural reasons, I'm pointing that out, that this is a public hearing and an opportunity for the citizens to speak about the budget process or anything they've heard during our budget meetings at this point. Is there anyone here that falls into that category as opposed to citizens to be heard? Fanny, come on up. Good morning.
Hi, my name's Fanny Bates. I live at 1116 Northwest 22nd. I just wanted to make some general comments about the budget. I think you know that one of the things that the citizens want to see in the budget is a better transportation. Well, we've told you this over and over. I'm saying it again. We want Sunday buses. We want more buses. We want not just buses. We want a real transportation system like other cities have. We want tornado shelters. We feel like we pay for millions of dollars worth of city, county, state, and federal buildings, and when there's a tornado coming, we can't go in there to get away from the tornado. That is sad. We want more police, but we want more services for teenagers. If we had more services for teenagers, we wouldn't need more police. We have almost nothing for teenagers to do in this town. If they don't have money, what else is there for them to do besides join a gang? They can't go places without money if we don't provide services, and we are not doing it. We provide things for little kids to do, but not for teenagers. And the last thing I want to mention is about the history of the Northeast Quadrant and the fact that so much of it is still being bulldozed. Ever since I can remember, and I can remember a long time, the Northeast Quadrant has been bulldozed. And this time the city's not doing it, but it's still happening. And I know that's not exactly a budget issue, but money affects everything, and I just want you to keep that in mind, that there's a racially disparate impact on the way the decisions that are made in this city affect that quadrant, and you need to always be aware of every decision you make, how it affects that part of town. Thank you.
Thanks for coming down. Anybody else who are wishing to speak under the public hearing opportunity under the budget? All right, move to item 4B. I understand we do not need executive session.
That's correct. We'll put it on for next week.
Okay, so we'll strike item 4B. We'll go to items from council. Gary, you want to start us off?
Do we need to vote on
All right. Ed?
I do. Can somebody pull up my... I just want the help of staff. I'm requesting to bring me up to speed on the boulevard. We touched on it last week. It hasn't been... I just need help understanding where we've been in the past. I really have 3 concerns, 2 of which I learned in the last 2 weeks at the Convention Center Subcommittee, and then 1 is going to be published in a story in the Gazette tomorrow, and it was put online on Friday. One is just the decision we touched on last week that the boulevard is basically going to have only a very short period that's at grade. That's between Lee and then halfway between Robinson and Shields. So one decision that apparently has been made is that that's going to curve south to accommodate a larger footprint for the convention center. So I'm not understanding, number one, how that decision to have a curvilinear boulevard, which seems somewhat unusual, how that decision was made and what went into that decision making, and what are the implications of having a curvilinear boulevard, and there may be none, but I just would like to be brought up to speed on that decision making, and how that was so matter-of-factly done. I mean, was that a request from the Convention Center Subcommittee, and so then the boulevard got pushed south? If so, are we giving similar weight to concerns of transit, for example, to have utility-free lanes in the boulevard? Second, I think the most The most concern has to do with the overpass, having an elevated area with retaining walls at over Classen, Western, and Reno. And I asked Eric last week if we had considered a roundabout, and he said that we had. So I'd like to know exactly how extensive that was. Did we do an alternatives analysis? Do we have ideas of cost? Do we have traffic studies? What went into the idea of potentially having a roundabout? This is a very, very rough draft, but just an idea of how something like this might work over Classen, Western, and Reno. I think it would. I mean, the reasons it has been proposed is that you'd have 3 stoplights in quick succession on Classen, Western, and Reno. A roundabout would seem to solve that problem, and it could be iconic. You could have a fountain or a statue in the center of that roundabout. It could introduce, you're telling drivers you are now entering downtown, the Court Shore area. It could be iconic and just something in line with, as Pete was alluding, something with the original intent of the boulevard, that it would be iconic and monumental, and as opposed to just an elevated roadway with 45-mile-an-hour speed limits. The third concern, if you can go to the next, and this will be in the Gazette's article tomorrow, but it's online now, is this question of how does the boulevard enter Bricktown? And for many years, renderings and videos it's been assumed that the exit was that Oklahoma Avenue would be extended south, and that the entrance off the boulevard would go onto Oklahoma Avenue. And can you go to the next slide? So what Mr. Green from ODOT and maybe Eric told the Gazette is that we don't have the right-of-way to extend Oklahoma Avenue south to the boulevard, and so we're considering this Compress Street, which would be just to the west of the U-Haul Center. The problem with that would seemingly be twofold, or it brings up 2 concerns. One is that you'd have 3 turns kind of to awkwardly enter Bricktown, which doesn't seem to flow, certainly the way that just going on to Oklahoma Avenue would. And second, if you move the exit into Bricktown west like that, then you're going to decrease the amount of room you have to go below grade to get underneath the rail to accommodate the BNSF. And so my concern is that, are we going to be able to go low enough below grade to accommodate future expansion of rail by making it wider if we did something like enter it at Compress? Can you go to the next one? And this is just from the north, and it shows the current U-Haul parking lot. Can you go to the next one? This is a potential solution would be to move the U-Haul parking lot to the west of the U-Haul and then extend Oklahoma Avenue down. I'm just bringing these to light and would like to as much feedback and be brought up to date in preparation for ODOT, which I understand is going to come address us.
They are. We'll get that information. I can give you a couple of answers right now. The curvilinear movement was thought to slow traffic down, be aesthetically more pleasing, and yes, it was requested as a comment that came out of the Convention Center Subcommittee and the MAPS Committee, and that was passed on. I thought it was something that could be reasonably accommodated. I can't really answer the stuff about Reno. I know that that's something that they're looking at, and they're looking at different alternatives over there. And I can't answer that one for you today, but we'll get back to you on information on that one. As far as where the boulevard enters Bricktown, we're clearly looking at all the alternatives you've looked at today, whether we move the parking lot, moving that around. That's still on the table, and those options are being evaluated at this point in time. So there hasn't been anything. I've seen options on all of what you just presented on that, and that is still being evaluated.
All right. Larry?
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to thank the folks from Musgrave Pennington for the meeting they had last night and for an opportunity to bring them up to date on a general way on the 23rd Street project. And just for those listeners who are out there, the 23rd Street project is part of the 2007 bond program. The bonds are scheduled to be sold in 2013. Engineering work is currently going on for that streetscape between Tulsa on the east and the Bethany line on the west. That'll be the first phase. The second phase will follow on a year or 2 later, where the project will be continued from Tulsa, now on the west, to I-44 on the east. The Windsor Area Business Group has met with the engineer 2 weeks ago. There'll be other meetings that go on, so that work is progressing, and we hope to have a very outstanding streetscape done, and one that will use the Windsor Hills Shopping Center as the epicenter to enhance the real estate values and quality of life of all the surrounding areas to that. There's a neighborhood meeting tonight at the John Glenn II Association that my wife and I will be attending, and then there's another very important meeting that I and Sergeant Burkeen will be at Walden Creek on Thursday evening, and I encourage all the residents out there to be out there to listen and for us to discuss their concerns. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Pete?
A couple comments. One is I agree with Ed with regard to the boulevard. You know, I don't want us to rush to a simple solution that doesn't really do what we, I use the term we loosely, what I envisioned the boulevard to be. I envisioned it to be a slower traffic, high impact addition to Oklahoma City. And I think to make it only 4 or 5 blocks long, and I think I'm right about that. That's about what we're talking about. Lita Robinson, we're talking about 4 or 5 blocks. To make it only 4 or 5 blocks long is a slap in the face, as far as I'm concerned, to what I envisioned it to be. I envisioned it to be kind of the grand entry to Oklahoma City from both sides. And you're not going to do that with an elevated, no-access facility for half of its length. You've got to. I think the roundabout idea is a great idea. I think we ought to look at it, and I also agree with the business about where we put the entrance to Bricktown. If we don't start thinking about accommodating rail, then we're making a huge mistake. Not to make those. We've had situations where ODOT was here and said, "Oh, we're just going to make that 2 rail." Even though it'll cost millions of dollars more to add that third commuter line, they still want to go ahead and build it with only 2 lines and one that's going north. And I think this is just another example of that, where we're not really looking at the long-term ramifications of continuing to destroy rail access. Because at some point, whether we all think it's a good idea or not, I believe rail is going to come. I believe people want a better transportation system. I think they want a more economical transportation system as far as their pocketbook is concerned. And I think we need to keep that foremost in what we're thinking about. I will pass the collection plate after. I do have something else. We had 30 applicants for the municipal judge's job, which is more than any of us anticipated, I think. So the Judiciary Committee will, between now and next Tuesday, I'm going to set a Judiciary Committee meeting for next Tuesday. Between now and next Tuesday, the committee has agreed to look over the 30, and we'll try to make a short list. What I don't know is how short the short list needs to be. I'm trying to follow the protocols of what the previous Judiciary Committees have done in vacancies before, but I want to make it as open as possible. So we'll have a Judiciary Committee. It will be an executive session because we will be reviewing personnel, so we'll just go into the committee and then we'll immediately go into executive session. Anybody that would like to see a list of the applicants, any council member that would want to attend the Judiciary Committee, you all know how our committee system works. If you're there, you get to talk and you get to vote. So, but I would like to do that and probably come up with a short list. And from looking it over, it's going to be difficult, in my opinion, to get a short list of less than 5 but maybe I'm just one person that's looked at it. But when you have 30 applicants, it's going to be pretty hard to cut it to less than 5. If the council doesn't want to make 5 interviews, then all you need to do is you can come to the meeting and vote for less than 5, or you can tell any one of the 3 of us that you just as soon only have 3, and we'll have 3. What I would propose is Judiciary Committee next Tuesday. We'll try to reduce it to whatever number we can do it without input from the council, or if the council wants to give us input, we'll do it to what you ask us to do. That sometime during the following week to 10 days, the council will conduct interviews of those people that we interview, and a selection will be made so that we can bring someone on board as soon as possible after the 1st of July. Now, that's That's just my view of an orderly way to do it, and it kind of follows what's happened in the past as near as I can reconstruct. It's been a long time since we've hired a judge. So it's, but anybody that has any questions or input, you can talk to David or Ed or myself, and we'll be glad to try to accommodate that when we're going through. But we did have some really, really good applications. It'd be very difficult to cut the list, in my view, much below 5. And when we do the interviews, I think you'll be impressed with the quality of the people that we had apply.
Good. David? All right, Meg?
Mayor, I guess just a couple of things. I'd like to add my scratchy voice to the concerns about ODOT. I think we feel probably that we're under some kind of time pressure to make this all happen, and I think there have been some changes that many of us were not aware of. So I really want to pay attention to this east entry into Bricktown and making sure that it works appropriately and is straightforward as it can possibly be. And so I'm looking forward to an opportunity to have a dialogue with ODOT. I know it's not just our decision, but I think we really need to make sure that this is as special as it possibly can be. So on a much more fun subject, tonight is the Mesta Park picnic, and I hope all the neighbors will be able to attend. And then this upcoming weekend is just a gigantic art opportunity in Oklahoma City. We've got the Dead Center Film Festival that starts tomorrow night with an event down at the Boathouse. It's a ticketed event, but I'm sure there's still some available, and they've moved the time to 5:30 from 6:30 so that we can accommodate tip-off for Wednesday's game. We've got the Red Earth Festival all weekend happening in downtown Oklahoma City. There's a parade on Friday, and just a fabulous event. And the Prix de West is this weekend out at the National Cowboy Museum. It's always for the city manager, it's always a nice boost in our tax revenues. I think we generally sell about $3.5 or $4 million worth of art over an evening on Saturday night. So I just want to encourage everybody. This is a fantastic opportunity to show off the talent and so many aspects of the arts community that exists here in Oklahoma City, and come out and enjoy all of it or whatever you can. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Skip?
Yes. Last Thursday, as a result of a comment that I made in reference to the youth violence in Oklahoma City, I received a call from Dr. Reed at Fairview Baptist Church and the president of the concerned clergy of Oklahoma City. And they called a meeting and invited me and the chief of police and the sheriff. And 50 ministers attended for a 2.5-hour session of addressing the issues of youth violence in our city. And this is something that I think that if we all would pay close attention, it's getting bigger and bigger in every major city. And to think that you now have people driving down the street and they are assaulted with handguns by kids that has nothing to do with any type of gang involvement at all. People's cars being, jacked, and they're being shot and thrown on the side of the street and left for dead. It's been a concern and has become a major concern with ministers and citizens all over this city. And it is not just limited to one side of Oklahoma City. We are seeing this in the northwest side of Oklahoma City. We're seeing it in a growing number on the south side of Oklahoma City, the northeast side of Oklahoma City. And I was glad that they at least took the position that this is not about First Amendment, Second Amendment rights. This is about a public health concern that we need to start looking at from a leadership of our city. And I've spoken to the manager, to our mayor, and they would like to have some time to come and discuss this with the mayor's office, the city manager's office, and see what could be done in reference to assisting on a community-wide, citywide basis. And as the chief of police said, we have 16 officers that are assigned to gang units. And there's a lot of things that I think that we could do on a citywide basis in reference to our youth programs that could prevent a lot of these kids from being involved in these type of activities. And we have some great programs. I think one of the problems, and the lady mentioned, Ms. Bates, that, I think one of the problems is that we don't elevate the programs that we do have in our city. We don't showcase enough of our programs. I was over to the Foster Center on Sunday afternoon. I was amazed at the number of parents that had their daughters there for AAU basketball that was there to practice on Sunday afternoon. One team was waiting at 4:30, and they were supposed to have the court at 4 o'clock, but because the other team had ran over. But that goes to tell you that obviously we don't have enough of those type of facilities that our children could be engaged in on a daily basis and a weekly basis. And there's a lot of parents, and there's a lot of coaches, there's a lot of people who are willing to do these type of programs if we would just open ourselves up and provide the space for a lot of these activities to be held at. And I think it goes to the prevention aspect of a lot of the youth violence and the juvenile issues that we have in our city. And so I would like for us to start at least having some conversation and dialogue in reference to that, because I think it would take a major load off of our police department. And the chief has got some programs that they're doing fantastic work over at the Northeast Center, the Hathaway program, and the PAL program. And I just think that if we could figure out a way to promote these programs in a larger and a bigger way, I think it would give a lot in reference to preventing a lot of children from steering off into the wrong way. And the cultural issue, this past Saturday, the Neighborhood Alliance had a bus tour of Northeast Oklahoma City. It was amazing. She said that there was approximately 150 people that participated in the tour, and they toured the northeast quadrant of Oklahoma City in the JFK area. 80% of the people did not even know what the JFK area was, had never been there, had never seen it, which I think goes to another point about how we promote the culture of our city. And in every part of this city, there is some great history and some great, culture that needs to be elevated so everyone will know, what it once was, what it is now, and, the renaissance that has occurred in reference to the city's participation in the redevelopment of it. And I just think that that's another issue that I would like to see the city start paying a little bit more attention to, is the cultural connection of our communities. And every last one of our communities has something that's different and unique and a proud history that I think would go well to being a total inclusive part of the showcase of our city.
Okay. Pat?
Thank you, Mayor.
Your Honor, just a quick comment. I was talking to Carl Springer this morning, and he indicated that at U.S. Grant High School, where the math competency examination last year had 38% of the students passing it, this year it's gone to 81%. I think it's a major, major accomplishment, and it shows what we can do if we really devote some time and attention to improving our Oklahoma schools.
Say that again.
The math competency test at U.S. Grant High School was 38% last year. This year was 81%.
Wow.
So it was a tremendous increase.
Yeah, I'll say.
And I think it's just a testament to what the Oklahoma City schools are doing right now, and they're improving all over the board.
It's great. Good to know. Thanks for passing that along. City manager reports?
Nothing this morning.
All right. Citizens to be heard. Nick Roberts. Morning, Nick. We'll need your name and address for the record, please.
Morning, Your Honor. Nick Roberts, 528 Waterview, Ward 5. Actually, I'm really glad to go last at the end of these things because I'm finally awake, which is a good thing after the celebrations that did ensue. And with that same admiring tone toward the city's accomplishments, I would like to lay out a few major concerns that I have. Councilman Shadid actually already touched many of the things that I was going to go into. But without further ado, I wanted to bring up Project 180. A lot of people are concerned about the prolonged reconstruction of West Main Street in Project 180, which has already successfully ran Trattoria El Centro out of business. Coney Island is possibly next to go, and Lunchbox was recently averted. But these are businesses that are being ran out of business by the prolonged 3-year-long construction of West Main Street when other projects have taken just 6 months. And many people in the community feel that the excuse of the basement that was fractured during the construction is just that, an excuse. Furthermore, the Civic Center park redesign debacle, many people are wanting more of an explanation as to why the council reversed its opinion on that issue. Many people are dissatisfied by the park redesign. Many people feel like it ignores what we did right with the Myriad Park redesign. Going further, we also think that there's little or limited cooperation between Project 180 and the streetcar project, and it just makes no sense that we're tearing up all these streets and reconstructing them only to tear them up again 2 years from now. And I understand that they're trying to at least coordinate where utilities are placed underground, but that is a mere fraction of the realm or the scope of coordination that could have possibly taken place between those two programs. Furthermore, historic building protection is not strong enough in the city. Just this month, we're probably going to see the demolition of the Hale Photo Building on North Broadway, which is an iconic structure that many people will be sad to see go. And many people would like to see more city proactive programs or action to get out ahead of dilapidated buildings and work with property owners so that we don't see these lose-lose situations with these kinds of buildings in the future. Perhaps this is the only way to remedy and to preserve our city's historic structures rather than having knee-jerk protests each time a building is proposed to be demolished. Proactive is probably better than reactive with historic buildings. Furthermore, many people are concerned about the substandard development that's creeping its way into downtown. Certainly an iconic project as far as that is concerned is the House of Bedlam in Bricktown. Many people think that the design code and city code needs to be made stronger so that the Bricktown Urban Design Commission can be more proactive in protecting our city's investment in the Bricktown district so that we don't have surface parking lining up against the canal, one of our city's prime jewels. Furthermore, street lighting is becoming a major issue, particularly in areas along Film Row. The new Film Row streetscape, it took them 6 months to get the street lights that they just put in turned on, and that took countless stories in the media to get that pressure applied to whoever's job it is to flip the switch after construction is finished. And if you go further west from the Film Row streetscape, west of Dewey, west of Chartel, there are still several street lights that aren't turned on when you get closer to Classen around the county jail. In Deep Deuce recently, along 2nd Street, they've turned off the street lights for the construction at Level and Aloft, and that took countless stories in the media, pressure on you guys, even state legislators getting involved just to get a limited number of those street lights turned back on in Deep Deuce. And the reason that street lighting is so important is because we're talking about public safety and creating a sense of public safety in downtown. And nothing, I mean, you can put 100 new officers on the street, but nothing is going to be more effective in promoting or creating public safety downtown than street lighting. Also, I think many people are disappointed in how we just gave up on Thunder Alley. I think that eliminating that collective team experience for people who can't afford $200 playoffs tickets. I myself am lucky that I've been able to get my hands on a few tickets to the playoffs games recently, but most people can't, and that's why those crowds grew to 8,000 people on those nights, because it was such a great thing for our city. So I think that within the realm of being responsible for public safety, we need to try and find some kind of an alternative team experience, collective community experience, because that was, TNT commentators, of course, were talking about the great spirit of this city with regards to that. Also, the biggest issue that I'm probably going to bring up, and I'm about halfway through actually, is the folly of
You're not going to be able to go halfway through. We got to move on. Why don't you wrap it up? Give me a summary right now.
Okay.
You can come back next
week. The biggest single issue that I think you guys have dropped the ball on is the folly of the disconnected Maps and 3 Park and the Myriad Gardens Park. You guys are putting a convention center between two parks, and not only that, but you have abandoned your promise to put the convention center last in Maps 3, and you've abandoned your promise to have a green strip. The Harvey Spine is what it was called in the Quarter Shore planning process, because the Skydance Bridge, That was moved to accommodate ODOT, and now the inlet that's going to go through the convention center is also going to be moved in the opposite direction that the Skydance Bridge was moved. So in effect, there will be no green spine anymore linking core to shore, so there will be no core to shore. I think that's a big issue, but I think there's a solution there. If you notice that the City Arts Center is wanting to relocate its building out to North 12th Street and Broadway, far removed from the Arts District, which many of us would probably agree that the City Arts Center would benefit from being in the Arts District, perhaps there could be a land swap orchestrated between the City Arts Center up on North Broadway and that convention center, and you could have the City Arts Center between those two parks instead of a convention center, and the convention center could benefit from collusion with the medical business district. And in fact, as many convention centers across the country are failing to meet the projections due to the trend of the 90s, which was that convention centers were popular. After 2008, convention centers have been very unpopular. I think that many cities have switched that concept to what they call a medical mart. I think that you guys should study Cleveland and especially Nashville, which have been interesting in pioneering this innovative approach to having a convention center that specializes in a subject or in a field that the city can expand on. Perhaps we would be beneficial in pursuing an aerospace mart, because that's an area that we're very successfully poised to grow in. And there are countless other issues, and I just wish that you guys could be applying more pressure to people like ODOT, who I feel are about to harm the city irreparably as far as the boulevard redesign goes, and other issues that I just don't think that we're getting enough public pressure on with regards. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Nick. Angie Milligan. Good morning. Thanks for your patience. We'll need your name and address for the record.
My name is Angie Milligan. Excuse me. I'm from 7142 Lyrewood Lane, Oklahoma City. And I am here as a representative for a group that is trying to save Thunder Alley. We do feel like there was a rush to judgment and how that should be handled, and we would like it to be reconsidered. And one of the things that we have touched on is the fact in this meeting today was budget concerns. Our city has been known as the example for all to follow in the face of terrorism. We rose to the occasion. We showed everybody how it should be done. And what we've sent out in the media because of the shooting in Bricktown was the fact that we're unable to handle an 8,000 strong member crowd. I think that really shames our city when we've spoken so well over so many years about our resilience. I think that the mission of the City Council on the sign outside is to preserve and grow citizen confidence and trust in city government. All of the MAPS initiatives were brought forth by the tax-paying voting citizens. We were told that there would be a Jumbotron for people to watch. That's now being taken away, and I understand that it was the Thunder Management's final decision, but it's the fiduciary responsibility of our City Council to follow through on the promises that they've made to our citizens. And if that Jumbotron is not available in Thunder Alley, they should make alternatives to the citizens that cannot provide the resources to take their families to Bricktown to watch the TV screens that are in the restaurants, or to pay for cable in their homes because they can't afford it. They should have an alternative. But more importantly than that, I love our city. I promote our city. I grew up all over the country. I was a military brat. I settled in Oklahoma City. I promote it constantly. The MAPS initiatives have been great. But in 2009, when we passed MAPS 3, our Oklahoma City Police Department had a staffing level that was the same as in 1986. That is shameful. There were 480,000 citizens in 1986. We have 540,000 citizens now. That, if taken from the city numbers and the city website, that gives us approximately 1,029 officers for an entire city of 540,000 citizens. We can promote the city, we can keep passing initiatives, but if we can't provide safety, we are never going to be the destination city that we want to be in, that we are trying to portray in the media. We cannot continue to have the many events that we have here and not ensure public safety. Thunder Alley was just one single event. We have Dead Center Film Festival, which I love, I support. We have the Olympics over on the river, we found a dead body in the river, and we're not shutting that down. I think they're just alternatives, and I think that one of the initiatives that we should make is when we are growing our city to the degree that we are, we should find somewhere within the city council budget to add to safety measures and safety precautions, event staffing. There should be a budget for those things too. If we want to keep bringing more city entertainment functions, whether it be opening night or whether it be something down on the river or something in Bricktown or maybe something on the northeast side of town, we should have resources already in place. This shouldn't be a hindsight issue. We know if we're growing our city, we should have some responsibility to making sure it's safe. And if that includes the city paying for additional resources for staffing and safety, I think that that's a way that we need to pursue that. And I think it's the responsibility of everybody sitting here to do that. I was listening to the presentation the police department did, and they were saying they had on most days 16 members in a particular district, and I counted the number sitting in here. There are 12 of you. So they're working with 4 more people in one district than you are sitting here, and they're responsible for the citizens in that district. I'd like you to think about that responsibility. If the members here were protecting a district that large, think about those same numbers and put yourself in those shoes. We owe that to our citizens before we pass any more initiatives or we try to bring any more events into our city. And I would encourage you again to think about Thunder Alley and the watch parties. We got a lot of really good media coverage because of that. They panned out to that crowd many, many times throughout the game. It brings our city together in a diverse way. I very rarely sit in Thunder Alley watch parties, I have to be honest with you. I usually am at the game or I am somewhere else within the city watching the game. But I did go a couple of times over the past couple of years during playoffs. I didn't encounter any problems while I was there, but some of the things that were addressed to me by the city were lack of trash receptacles. I had to walk 2 blocks to find one. I raised my concerns about the number of personnel in the area, and yet a few days later, when there was nobody in Bricktown because the cancellation of the Thunder Alley Watch Party, we had 140 more staff members and police only. I couldn't tell you how many more event staff were there. It was a large number. I enjoyed that evening.
We've got to move on. Thanks.
I appreciate the time. Thank you.
You bet. And we're adjourned.